Welcome to Fanfiction Audiobooks. Marvel World Destroyer. Chapter 41 Return. The two behemoths fought back and forth in the city, destroying all the surrounding buildings. Looking at the mecha Yehu coming to support from a distance, he frowned, put the mecha into his backpack and stood in the air and whispered. I originally wanted to get along with you as a mech pilot, but what I got in return was a beating. Don't pretend that I'm the king and I'm going to showdown. In the horrified eyes of Jack and Knight, two beams of heat penetrated the mecha shell and cut them in half. As the two passed away, the whole world began to become illusory. The next second, Yehu returned to the abandoned factory. Yehu came to Xavier Academy for gifted boys according to the address left by Charles, and waved to Jessica who was running with a group of mutant children on the playground. Free activities now. After Jessica issued the order, she ran towards Yehu and shouted loudly, Boss, you are finally back. When are we leaving? I see that you were quite happy just now. If you like, you can stay here. With Professor X trusting you, nothing will happen to you. A smile appeared on Yehu's lips and his tone was very calm. Jessica shook her head when she heard this and whispered, it was okay at first, but as time went on, it became a bit boring. And the professor always said recently that someone was trying to interfere with his thinking. Yehu's pupil shrank, remembering a plot in X-Men, but according to the timeline, the other party should have appeared when Charles was young. Thinking of this, Yehu also gave up the idea of letting Jessica stay, and brought the other party to principal's office and farewell to Charles. Wait! Cyclops plucked up the courage to stop the two who were about to go downstairs and whispered, can you tell me how to control it? Seeing the twisted expression on Cyclops' face, Yehu shrugged and said in a flat tone, I don't know what's going on, maybe it's a talent. The corner of Cyclops' mouth trembled slightly, feeling that this wave was pretended by the other party, but he was very angry because he couldn't find a reason to refute. Yehu took Jessica to Stark Manor. After getting Stark's permission, the two went to the lobby on the first floor. Yehu slowly sat on the sofa and said in a calm tone. I'm going to sell you the 10% of my shares. Stark picked up the coffee on the table and pointed to the seat opposite him and said softly, no problem, I'm more curious about your identity than this. S.H.I.E.L.D. specifically checked your information but found no such person. Can you tell me your true identity? Yehu, who was about to get up, had a strange look on his face when he heard this. Jessica on the side pricked up her ears calmly, preparing to listen to the boss's gossip. Yehu glanced at Stark and said with a bad tone, knowing too much is not a good thing for you. Seeing Yehu preparing to leave, Jessica quickly stood up. Stark sighed and whispered, you are kind to me and I don't want to be on the opposite side of you. S.H.I.E.L.D. has already targeted you. Try to be careful in the future. Before I've had someone rebuild that house for you and it will take about a month to complete. A cold light flashed in Yehu's eyes. What Nick Fury did made him very unhappy. He nodded to Stark and took Jessica out of the manor. The two came to the hotel where Yehu woke up and prepared to wait for the house to be built here. Yehu sat on the sofa and recalled the plot of Apocalypse. The other person was the first known mutant with the ability to plunder other mutants for thousands of years. His time has allowed him to accumulate many powerful abilities, and he can also enhance the abilities of other mutants. Yehu is very envious of this ability. In the movie, if Jean Grey had not exploded with the Phoenix power, young Charles and others might not have been able to defeat Apocalypse. But if it were to change to the current world, Tiankai's strength would not be enough. My compatriots, I am Apocalypse, let us work together to build a national server unique to mutants. Yehu turned his head to look at the surprise in Jessica's eyes and understood that the other party heard the voice just like him. After thinking for a second, he decided to ignore it. At the same time, a figure was moving quickly through the water under a glacier somewhere in the Arctic. Namor Mackenzie watched the tribe above the glacier gently wave the Neptune trident in his right hand to break through the ice and jump to the shore. He heard that this tribe's for a person to regard a piece of ice as a religion is simply not to take him as the king of Atlantis seriously. He dared to believe in other things on his territory. Namor punched the trident on the ice to control the sea water and rolled the huge ice into the sea. When the people in the tribe saw that Namor could control the sea water, they knelt down and worshipped. At this moment, the voice of Apocalypse sounded in Namor's mind, and a trace of boredom flashed in his eyes. Just one Atlantis was enough to give him a headache. After Namor left, the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who were watching from a distance rushed into the tribe to look for Steve. A month ago, they detected Steve's life breath, but they were attacked during the excavation, and Steve was frozen. Husband's ice cube went missing in the battle. They found this tribe after some searching. Unexpectedly, they met Namur, the famous Neptune during Steve's time. 7 hours later, everyone found the ice block that sealed Steve 500 meters away from the tribe. A week later, in the underground research room of S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, Nick Fury looked at the strong figure on the experimental table with complicated eyes through the glass. Apocalypse uses his teleportation powers to reach Magneto's Brotherhood, spreads his arms and shouts. "Some of you will be my knights, now begin to please me." But everyone in the Brotherhood just turned their attention to Magneto to see what the other party said. Eric frowned when he saw the sudden appearance of several people. The other party was poaching people in front of him, obviously not taking him seriously. Apocalypse raised his hands and frowned slightly. The iron elements in his body surged crazily, and the metal objects on his body began to rush into his body. Apocalypse roared and fired energy shocks in all directions to bounce the metal on his body away. The powerful energy was 1 meter away from Magneto, isolated by an invisible magnetic field. When Apocalypse saw that the energy ray could not stop the opponent, he turned to telepathy to control Magneto mentally. However, he tried several times but failed to break through the opponent's psychic defense. Apocalypse looked at the helmet on the opponent's head and his face darkened. After changing several abilities, he still couldn't break the magnetic field condensed around Magneto. Magneto also had a headache with Apocalypse, whose abilities were diverse. His abnormal recovery ability reminded him of Wolverine. After a moment of silence, Apocalypse whispered, "You are very capable, and I am willing to work with you to build a mutant empire to rule the entire world." Eric rolled his eyes and felt that the other party was somewhat seriously ill. There were too many powerful people in this world. When he was young, he had seen a mage who could create a space by raising his hand, and there was also the Atlantis man who had Namur, who can control the sea with Neptune's trident. Coupled with the recent Thor video that went viral on the internet and the battle between two giants not long ago, these all told him that the world was much broader than he imagined. Chapter 42 Alliance. After some exchanges, Apocalypse and Magneto formed an alliance. Apocalypse read the memories in the minds of the Brotherhood members and understood the changes in the world. Magneto decided to target Professor Strength. Charles dispersed the children in the college and brought the X-Men to the school gate to confront the Brotherhood led by Magneto. High-level officials from all over the world used satellites to observe everything happening here. Magneto took the lead in controlling the iron in the X-Men's bodies. Elemental, not to be outdone, Charles uses telepathy to control Brotherhood members. The red tank lowered its head and accelerated, knocking Wolverine away. The battle was about to begin. Jean Grey slowly walked to Charles and exploded the Phoenix power in her body, seriously injuring Apocalypse who was approaching. Looking at the opponent's slowly growing body and frowning, Magneto raised his right hand and prepared to control the iron element on Jean Grey's body, but was interrupted by the energy emanating from the opponent's body. Looking at the Phoenix figure behind Jean Grey, Magneto remembered a legend and felt that he was a little hasty this time. Who would have thought that the usually unassuming girl pushing a wheelchair could be the host of the Phoenix Force? Just when Magneto thought he was about to explain that he was here, a red figure descended from the sky, and its huge mental power blocked Jean Grey's Phoenix shock wave. Feeling the huge power in the two people's bodies, Magneto had the illusion that he was old. Jean Grey raised her eyebrows and punched Wanda in the face. The two of them were fighting back and forth. Some weaker mutants were directly turned into ashes when they touched the energy emanating from the two of them. The corner of Apocalypse's mouth in the distance twitched slightly, and he no longer had the idea of ruling the world in his heart. The two people slowly fired the real fire, and the area affected was getting wider and wider. The eyes of the senior officials of various countries showed solemn looks. Yehu watched the battle downstairs and wiped the non-existent sweat from his forehead. He was glad that he did not go to Tiankai to strengthen himself. Ability. He could not interfere in a battle of this level. Jessica looked at the two of them with admiration. 5 minutes later, the two stopped what they were doing and stood in the ruins staring at each other. The power shown by the mutants this time frightened the leaders of various countries. They did not expect that the X-Men and the Brotherhood were hiding such powerful figures. The two of them destroyed a street just by fighting casually. This kind of destructive power was simply walking nuclear bomb. High-level government officials began funding Stryker's mutant experiments. At the same time, in a certain underground laboratory of S.H.I.E.L.D., Dr. Eric took off the black cloth from his eyes and squinted to adapt to the surrounding brightness and whispered. "This place is like a maze, and you are the manipulator behind it. I thought you were going to kill me." Nick Fury slowly walked up to Dr. Eric and said in a calm tone, I have been paying attention to the affairs of Old Bridge Town. Your talents should be used on more valuable things. Nick Fury paused slightly, then opened the box on the side and said passionately, if we can find a way to manipulate it, we can gain infinite power. The projection of Loki reflected in the glass on the side looked at the space gem in the box and said in a deep voice, this is interesting. After speaking, he controlled Dr. Eric to repeat it, and Nick Fury showed a gleam of joy on his face. Science geeks only need to find a good entry point to gain access to each other's knowledge, and there is no such thing as salary. How to measure ideals with money? I leave this thing to you, Doctor. I hope you can figure out its use as soon as possible so that we can better face those emergencies. Nick Fury patted Dr. Eric on the shoulder and turned to the elevator. Loki's eyes shone with light. With the space gem, he could teleport Thanos' Kirita army to Earth. Asgard, which lost the Bifrost, was unable to cope with such a surprise attack. Loki did not choose to do it immediately but used the projection to search for other gems on the Earth. Yehu looked at the ability extraction card worth 10,000 points in the mall and his eyes flickered. There are still 6,000 left to buy an ability extraction card. The battle between Qin Gilei and Wanda 2 days ago made Yehu deeply realize his own weakness. He remembered that there was a plot where Qin Gilei ran away and was stabbed to death by Wolverine. Yehu wanted to use his ability to extract the card at that time. Extract the Phoenix power from Jean Grey's body to strengthen herself. Jessica, I have to go out for something. If someone comes to me to sign, you can sign it for me. Yehu knocked on the door of Jessica's room and listened to the other party's confused answer. He moved his eyes to the word King Kong in the world option and silently recited his confirmation. The next second, Yehu appeared in the air and felt the raging wind around him. Twitching, after scanning around, I found a shadow on the right side. While flying towards the shadow, Yehu was thinking about whether to exchange points for a contract scroll and take away the chimpanzee standing on the building fighting a fighter jet. Thinking of the opponent's height of more than 10 meters, Yehu shook his head and looked at the charming scenery around him with a relaxed smile on his face. A few pterosaurs slowly flew over and seemed to regard him as an intruder. 2 red lights flashed in Yehu's eyes, and several pieces of broken pterosaur corpses fell heavily on the ground with a scent of meat. The cannibals who were performing sacrifices looked at the smoking pterosaur corpses and subconsciously looked up at the black sky. Yehu landed on the rock and waited for King Kong to come to collect its sacrifice. Jack, who found that and was not there, immediately reported the matter to the captain. Everyone looked at the burning island in the distance and hesitated for a moment, then turned the boat around to rescue An. Amidst the shouts of the indigenous people, King Kong jumped to the edge of the cliff, reached out to grab An, and was about to leave. At this moment, 2 red lights penetrated its chest. Yehu looked at the shaking body of King Kong and released a continuous wave of energy in his eyes. The thermal energy beam was like a hot knife cutting butter, cutting the 10-meter-high King Kong in half together with the piece of An in the opponent's hand. The natives slowly stopped cheering and looked at the humanoid monster with red eyes in the lightning. It only took 2 moves to kill their patron saint. After confirming that the 2 were dead, Yehu opened his hands and prepared to welcome the return. But after waiting for a few seconds, he didn't see the world becoming illusory. After looking at the mission progress, which was only 25%, Yehu thought about it and suddenly remembered that King Kong seemed to have a Skull Island plot. Thinking of this, the tall figure of the other party flashed through Yehu's mind. He glanced at the shopping mall options and felt a little moved. He ignored the natives rushing towards him and jumped into the air and flew quickly towards the island. 10 minutes later, the captain led a group of crew members and rushed into the indigenous tribe with pistols. After a fight, everyone came to the altar and looked at An's dead body, filled with anger in their hearts. After a killing, everyone took An's body back to the boat and quickly left this terrifying island. Chapter 43 King Kong. Yehu searched for the giant King Kong on the small island. 3 days later, he walked through a gully and came to the other side of the island. He frowned slightly as he looked at the modern fortress in the distance. He didn't remember that there was such a building in the plot of Kong Skull Island. He used his mental power to control a truck driver to hide in the opponent's car and sneak into the base. He was walking in the lush forest and suddenly heard a loud noise from a distant waterfall. The orangutan emerged from the waterfall. Yehu slowly opened his mouth wide, and a bad thought emerged in his heart. He remembered that in the Skull Island plot, King Kong didn't seem to be more than 50 meters, but this guy was over 100 meters. After King Kong took a bath, he came to the forest and pulled out a giant tree was thrown towards the sky. Looking at the sky where a big hole was opened, a picture flashed in Yehu's mind and he whispered. Could it be Godzilla vs King Kong? No, it can't be so unlucky. Mr. Brother's atomic breath is not something I can bear at this age. Looking at the birds flying in the jungle not far away, Yehu quickly walked over and found a woman observing King Kong with a telescope. A car slowly stopped in the woods. A black man opened the door and walked towards the woman. Beside Yehu walked out from behind the tree and used telepathy to control the two of them. He learned from the other party about Godzilla's existence and his cheeks twitched slightly. Isn't this bullying an honest person? Is the atomic breath of Brother General so easy to catch? That kind of power would probably kill you instantly with just one mouthful, leaving no trace of you behind. But if you want to leave this world, you have to deal with two giant beasts. After thinking for a second, Yehu decided to wait for Mechagodzilla to appear in the plot before taking advantage. After setting the goal, Yehu controlled the female doctor to take him away from the base. A week later, Yehu boarded the aircraft carrier as a female doctor's assistant. Looking at the handsome boy from Skull Island lying on the deck, the corners of his mouth turned up slightly. He would soon receive the first beating in his life. There was a thunderstorm in the sky at night. The handsome boy from Skull Island weakly stretched out his left hand to block the strong light from the searchlight. The continuous sedatives and the surrounding sea water made him feel very unsafe. 3 days later, the fleet sailed into the Tasman Sea. Yehu stood on the deck and looked at the scenery in the distance. The handsome boy from Skull Island reached out and grabbed a mountain of fish on the side and threw it into his mouth. A large amount of residue fell on the deck. A fishy smell followed the sea breeze. Blow it in front of Yehu. King Kong, who was eating fish, suddenly became violent. He let out a roar and kept pulling on the chain. A huge dorsal fin appeared on the sea in the distance, and when he passed a warship, he cut it in half. 4 combat ships took off from the aircraft carrier and fired at the dorsal fin. Suddenly, a thick tail was pulled out from the sea and destroyed 3 fighter jets and 2 warships. Yehu saw this scene with a look of expectation on his face. Godzilla swam towards the aircraft carrier where King Kong was and knocked the aircraft carrier over with a headbutt. Several surrounding warships immediately used naval guns to attack Godzilla's location. In the warship control room, Yehu used his mental power to press the chain controller to release King Kong. The 2 giant beasts began to wrestle in the sea. Looking at Godzilla's fat body, Yehu had a smile on his lips. This version of the brother always looked a bit silly. Yehu decided to trick Mr. Brother away. Who can resist a silly and cute Godzilla? After a fight, the handsome boy from Skull Island straightened the aircraft carrier and stood on it. He roared, jumped onto the opposite aircraft carrier with all his strength, and stared at it intently. Underwater reflection. Seeing the dorsal fin King Kong exposed on the sea and throwing away the surrounding fighter jets as hidden weapons, Godzilla suddenly waved his tail to speed up his progress, grabbed the aircraft carrier with his 2 thick front paws and climbed up. King Kong, who was standing on top, raised his right hand and hit Godzilla hard on the face, knocking him staggering. Godzilla roared and waved his right palm and slapped the pretty guy from Skull Island hard on the face, knocking him to the ground. Several fighter jets fired missiles at Godzilla's back to interrupt his follow-up skills. King Kong shook his head and regained consciousness before punching away Godzilla who was about to ride on him. He stood up and knocked the opponent into the water with an iron rocker. Yehu was stunned by this combination of punches. Godzilla swam under the aircraft carrier and began to gather light blue energy in his mouth. The next second, a light blue beam of light shot straight into the sky and blew up the aircraft carrier. King Kong jumped into the sea to escape. Attack! The atomic breath is indeed well deserved. Yehu looked up at the light beam connecting the sky and the earth, and suddenly felt that his thermal energy beam was no longer fragrant, and he was very sure that he could not defeat Godzilla. I silently pray in my heart that the other party will not evolve into the Red Lotus form, and follow the plot honestly, and enter my contract space after being violently beaten by mechanical Godzilla. King Kong was beaten up by Godzilla in the sea and soon ran out of air in his lungs. Everyone on the aircraft carrier used depth bombs to repel Godzilla and rescued the handsome boy from Skull Island. Godzilla survived and swam again. To the aircraft carrier, the doctor in the control room quickly shouted. The 2 of them will stop fighting only when the winner is determined. Turn off the engine and we will let it win. The captain hesitated for a second and then issued an order through the communication channel. Godzilla slowly slowed down, raised his head and let out a roar, stamping his legs crazily under the sea to maintain balance. King Kong showed a trace of displeasure on his face as he listened to the opponent's roar of victory. Godzilla floated on the water and waited for a while. Looking at King Kong lying on the aircraft carrier, a trace of disdain appeared on his face and he slowly sank into the water to wait for the next battle. Fighting! Everyone stared blankly at Godzilla cruising in the nearby waters. After hesitating for a while, the doctor suggested using a helicopter to transport King Kong to the launch port of the Earth's Hollow in Antarctica, so that the other party could take him and others to find energy. A week later, everyone arrived at the Antarctic. King Kong reached out and grabbed the snowflakes on the ground with a look of confusion in his eyes. The little girl used gestures to tell him that his kind might exist in the cave in front of him. King Kong snorted and quickly walked towards the cave on all fours. Yehu used his mental power to change everyone's memories and successfully got on board a geocentric aircraft. After passing through a blue light, everyone came to another world. King Kong roared and ran quickly in the forest. Suddenly, a flying beast rushed out to interrupt King Kong's beautiful mood. After a fight, King Kong was restrained by the other party and was about to become food. The people accompanying him quickly attacked the flying snake with weapons on the aircraft. King Kong broke free and felt a sense of shame and anger. He squeezed the wings of the flying snake with both hands and held it in his arms, slamming it back and forth. Feeling the weakening strength in his arms, he raised his head to the sky and roared with his right hand, twisting off the flying snake's head with his right hand, and began to feast on food to replenish the energy he had consumed before. After eating and drinking, he once again headed towards the place he sensed before. Yehu looked at the giant crab on the ground that was awakened by King Kong from the window and wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth. The other party must have a lot of crab roe. Everyone followed King Kong to an upside-down mountain peak and unlocked the door through the palm prints to enter a palace. Looking at the empty hall, King Kong let out a mournful cry, strolled towards the throne, picked up the broken axe on the ground, swung it twice, and then slowly sat on the throne with a satisfied smile on his face. Chapter 44 Godzilla vs King Kong. Just as the people organized by Apex were collecting energy, a group of giant bat-like beasts descended from the sky and began to attack the crowd. King Kong raised his battle axe and charged towards the bats. The beast melts. King Kong heard the roar from the other end of the passage and felt that the axe in his hand was already thirsty. After roaring, he jumped into the passage with the axe in hand. 10 minutes later King Kong climbed out of the hole and attacked Godzilla in the distance. Yehu hid in the pothole and listened to the battle above. Suddenly there was a sound of an engine under his feet. He looked down and found that it was a female doctor driving the aircraft and was about to rush out of the pothole. Yehu shot 2 heat rays from his eyes and exploded the aircraft. Seeing a few people under high pressure, Hawaii became fans. King Kong leaped into the sky with a huge axe in his hand, and slashed at Hwashin with all his might, but was stuck in the building by the opponent's axe that was dodging sideways and emitting blue light. Godzilla bites the back of King Kong's neck and throws the opponent away, brewing atomic breathing in his mouth. King Kong hits Godzilla with an elbow hard on the neck and interrupts the opponent's skill read bar. And tried to break Godzilla's mouth with his hands and tear it in half, but the high temperature of the atomic breath made him give up this idea. He could only cover Godzilla's mouth with his hands and rotate it twice in place, throw it out. King Kong used the surrounding tall buildings to jump into the air and crazily attacked Godzilla's head. Watching Godzilla, who was knocked to the ground by himself, beat his chest excitedly, he felt that the last time he was beaten violently in the sea was revenge. He casually grabbed the giant axe on the building beside him and prepared to chop off the opponent's head as a souvenir. Godzilla's atomic breath shot at King Kong's head, but the opponent blocked it with the giant axe. Godzilla rushed to King Kong and pushed him to the ground. King Kong slashed Godzilla's thigh with an axe. The painful Godzilla kicked King Kong away, bit the handle of the axe and threw it to a distant building. The hot atomic breath chased King Kong frantically and destroyed all the high-rise buildings along the way. King Kong couldn't dodge and was wiped by the atomic breath from his back, and a scent of meat emerged in the air. Godzilla looked at King Kong, who was rolling on the ground with a mocking smile, and shot another atomic breath to drive King Kong to heaven and earth. King Kong, who was fleeing for his life, saw a glint of light in the eyes of the giant axe stuck on the tall building in the distance. He jumped to the building, took off the giant axe and jumped over Godzilla to cut off the opponent's head. The hot atomic breath collided with the giant axe in the air, and the energy in the giant axe instantly rushed to Godzilla. After a loud noise, King Kong was blown 10 meters away by the air wave generated by the explosion, and Godzilla rolled his eyes, slowly fell to the ground. A few minutes later, King Kong shook his head and stood up, brushing off the scorched black hair on his body, screaming to the sky. Venting all the previous depression, watching Godzilla, who stood up, jumped to the back of the opponent, and tightly strangled Godzilla with his left hand. The right hand on the neck kept hitting the opponent's head. Godzilla hugged King Kong's arm with both paws and threw him over his shoulder hard, throwing him to the ground. Seeing this scene, Yehu swallowed his saliva, thinking in his heart that monsters fight like this all these years? An over-the-shoulder throw is really outrageous. Thinking of the scene where King Kong used Tishan to knock Godzilla into the sea on the aircraft carrier, Yehu felt uncomfortable for a while. If he didn't have the monster skin, he would believe that two martial arts masters were fighting. King Kong, who did not have a giant axe, was knocked to the ground by Godzilla's combination of punches and stepped on him with his right foot. Godzilla looked down at King Kong with a trace of sarcasm on his lips. It has not encountered an opponent for a long time since it defeated the three-headed dragon Ghidorah. After some thought, it decided to let the little brother at its feet let the opponent grow for a while. At the same time, the Apex organization released Mechagodzilla and prepared to let people drive it to end the Godzilla myth. However, the driver was backlashed by Ghidorah's remaining consciousness, and Ghidorah controlled the new body to destroy the experimental base. Godzilla looked at Mechagodzilla in the distance with an angry look on his face. Mechagodzilla used Proton Scream to send out a red shock wave to destroy the surrounding buildings. Godzilla roared and rushed towards Mechagodzilla. He wanted to fight Mechagodzilla in close combat, but the opponent showed no martial ethics and bombed it with missiles. Godzilla raised his right paw against the missile and gave Mechagodzilla a big showdown. Scylla staggered. The next second, the propeller behind Mechagodzilla began to ignite, and the powerful power drove the right arm of the Mecha to hit Godzilla's face hard, knocking it to the ground. Godzilla, who had just experienced a battle, was pressed down by the opponent. Beat him up on the ground. Yehu stood on the rooftop and looked at Godzilla, who was standing on the left using his atomic breath and Mechagodzilla's Proton Scream, and whispered. According to the law of losing to the left side of bow, Mr. Brother should be in trouble this time. As soon as he finished speaking, Godzilla was blasted dozens of meters away by the Proton Scream and slammed into a building. The skin on his chest also began to turn red under the high temperature. Yehu's eyes narrowed and he decided to be a hero to save the beast, and then asked the other party to sign a contract of betrayal in return for his kindness. Mechagodzilla opened Godzilla's mouth and was about to fire a Proton Scream into it. Suddenly, two chopstick-thick heat energy rays shot out two small holes in its mechanical right arm. The corner of Yehu's mouth twitched slightly, feeling the damage from his attack. Not very insulting. Mechagodzilla dropped Godzilla's head and looked sideways at the extremely small Yehu. A red beam of light began to gather in his mouth. Yehu swallowed his saliva and released continuous heat rays, preparing to cut the opponent's body. Lying on the ground, Godzilla glanced sideways at Yehu, with a hint of gratitude in his eyes. He kicked Mechanic Godzilla with his right foot, causing the opponent's Proton Scream to deflect and land 10 meters to Yehu's right. Yehu's thermal energy ray cut Mechagodzilla's neck by a third, and the painless Mechagodzilla turned his head in Yehu's direction. The hot beam plowed a ravine on the ground. The closer he was to Yehu, the slower the beam moved forward. A few drops of blood flowed down Yehu's nose. After resting, Godzilla suddenly turned over and slammed into Mechanical Godzilla, sending him flying 10 meters away. A mechanical head fell slowly under the cutting of the heat rays. Yehu closed his eyes, feeling a little sore. It was the first time he had used thermal rays continuously for a long time. Yehu used his mental power to carry himself to Godzilla, took out a scroll and whispered, "Do you want to travel around the world with me?" Godzilla blinked his small eyes and spewed out 2 streams of hot air from his nostrils. He could vaguely perceive the emotion of the little thing in front of him. After hesitating for a second, Godzilla stretched out his left index finger and tapped on the scroll. Looking at the scroll turned into ashes, Yehu's eyes showed a gleam of joy. Who can refuse a monster that emits atomic breath? When he goes to Ultra World in the future, there will be a wave of self-directed and self-acted monsters fighting Gundam. Roar! Godzilla felt Yehu's excitement and roared to the sky, with a smile on his lips. Chapter 45 Brotherhood. Yehu took out a contract and came to King Kong, who had more air in and less air out, and said softly, "Sign it and you will survive." King Kong blew out 2 pillars of air from his nostrils and stared at Yehu. After hesitating for a second, he moved his right hand. Seeing this, Yehu quickly came to King Kong and pressed the scroll into his hand, watching it turn into ashes. A smile appeared on the scroll's face. Yehu put the 2 giant beasts into the contract space and looked at the world that was gradually becoming emptier. He felt relieved and decided not to touch Godzilla-related movies in the future if he was not as strong as Heavenly Father. If he encountered Planet Godzilla or Hell Brother, Scylla's strength was immediately cool. After returning to Marvel, Yehu looked at the closed door in front of him and smiled, sitting on the sofa and waiting for the person arranged by Stark to come to the door. An hour later, there was a knock on the door. Jessica's door was closed tightly and she could not breathe. Yehu shook his head and opened the door. He looked at the middle-aged man in a suit and leather shoes in front of him and whispered. Anything? Hello, I am a lawyer from Stark Group. Are you Mr. Yehu? Seeing Yehu nod, the middle-aged uncle quickly took out a document. After checking it casually, Yehu signed his name at the signature place. Since then, he has only held 5% of the shares of Stark Group. Yehu watched the other party leave and then looked at the 12,000 points in the mall with a smile on his face. This time the system judged that he had completed 5 movie plots. Yehu left the hotel and went to an uninhabited shore to wrap it up with spiritual power. The body quickly swam toward the depths of the sea. What Stark said before made him decide to build a base in the sea so that S.H.I.E.L.D. would not be able to monitor him at all times. Yehu rushed all the way to the deep sea, randomly found an undersea mountain of 400 to 500 meters. Released Godzilla and shouted in a low voice, "The decision is yours. Godzilla. Use atomic breath. Roar." Godzilla roared, opened his mouth, and used his atomic breath to create a hole in the mountain. Soon, a hole of 100 meters was opened in the mountain of several hundred meters. Yehu took Godzilla back to the contract space and used his mental power to remove it. The seawater in the pothole was squeezed out, and the handsome boy from Skull Island was released to let the opponent expand the pothole. Yehu looked at the hollowed-out mountain with a satisfied look on his face. He was going to take Yvonne and the big boss back after a while and let them study technology for him here. At the same time, Magneto, who returned to the temporary base, looked at the man and woman in front of him and said calmly, "Thank you very much for your help today. See you again in the future." "Do you know Magda?" Wanda's words made Eric tremble. He recalled the death of his daughter Anya in his mind. He looked at Wanda with cold eyes and said word by word, "Who are you? How do you know these things?" Wanda stared at Eric and said unhurriedly, "Magda is our mother, Bova told us that you are our father." Eric's pupil shrank, and the happy time he had with Magda flashed before his eyes. If it weren't for those thugs, he would have a happy family now. Eric forced himself to calm down, and looked at Wanda carefully and found that Wanda was taller. "It does look a lot like Magda." What's your name?" Eric's voice was trembling, and his face began to twitch. He had forgotten how to smile after not smiling for so long. Wanda looked at the helpless Eric, and his eyes turned slightly red. "My name is Wanda Maximoff and he is my brother Perd Maximoff. The person who adopted us before died and I came here to look for you." Eric held their hands and whispered, "Please stay with me from now on." Looking at his 2 children, Eric's heart no longer felt cold, and everything in the past came to mind. For a moment, he wanted to lead the 2 of them to a peaceful life, but he thought of his daughter's death and the inequality he had encountered over the years. He suppressed this thought again. Tiankai's eyes flashed slightly as he listened to the conversation between the 3. Before, he secretly sent a message to prepare to join forces with Magneto to deal with these 2 uninvited guests, but now he became an outsider. Seeing that the other party has such a powerful daughter, Tiankai has already made plans to run away. In the past, the 2 of them could restrain each other, but now the situation has become one-sided. If he stays, he will probably surrender. Apocalypse asked Magneto to leave. Eric nodded casually and pulled the 2 of them out of the base. The 3 of them talked about their experiences as they walked. Wanda's eyes showed anger when she heard Magneto's experience and the tragic death of her sister. Expression. "They were unwilling to let me go when I was living in seclusion, now I want them to pay the price." Eric's eyes showed hatred. Wanda and Pietro looked at each other and nodded heavily. On the other hand, Charles called Jean Grey into the room and whispered, "What do you think of the mutant who suddenly appeared today?" "Very strong, I feel like she has the same power as me." Jean Grey looked at Charles with a serious face. The 2 of them just had a casual fight today. She could not fully control the power in her body, so she did not continue to attack. The other party seemed to have scruples, so the 2 of them stopped with a tacit understanding. There was a trace of melancholy in Charles's eyes. Eric's hatred for human beings was too deep. He just hoped that the other party was just passing by. If the other party joined the Brotherhood, it would be a disaster for the X-Men and the world. At the same time, a conical small spacecraft landed slowly in a lawn. A dog came to the spacecraft and roared at a flower vine. The next second the flower vine opened its flower bones above its head and let out a roar to scare the dog away. Hui Tang squirmed and came to a magazine and transformed into the appearance of a female star in it. Before she could recover, a strong man with a knife ran out from a distance and strangled her neck from behind. The strong man pulled Siriana, who was dressed in underwear, into the grass nearby. Just as he was about to take off his clothes, he saw the other party's mouth wide open. After a while, Siriana walked out with a big belly after shaking. Half an hour later, Serlina found the two-headed man and asked him about the whereabouts of the Light of Sada. The two came to a pizza shop. Serlina held the Sada man disguised as the boss in the air and asked him about the whereabouts of the Light of Sada. The boss whispered in order to hide the traces of the Light of Sada. "Sorry you're late. He will leave the third planet and go home tomorrow afternoon." Serpentina's face turned cold after hearing the other party's answer. Her left index finger turned into a snake and split the boss into two pieces. Laura, who was hiding in the kitchen, witnessed all this with her own eyes. After the two left, she covered her mouth and cried softly. Jay took Laura to a pizza shop to learn more about it and then gave up the method of erasing the other party's memory. He drove to the place where the spacecraft landed and talked to the boss Z. After learning about the information about the Light of Sada, he went there at the other party's prompting. Looking for K at the suburban post office. Chapter 46 The Light of Sada. Jay took the other party back to the headquarters of the Men in Black, intending to help K recover his memory and then go find the Light of Sada together. Jay looked at K looking around and shouted with some displeasure. "Don't mess around. I didn't do anything." K took back his hand and showed an innocent look. K sighed and whispered, "Put your hands in your pockets and follow me." After speaking, he opened the weapons arsenal behind him and took out a small pistol and said in a sincere tone, "This is your favorite weapon?" "This gadget." K had a puzzled expression on his face, and a voice in his heart told him that the other party was lying. Jay smiled and handed the small pistol to K. The two put on their uniforms and came to the memory recovery room. At this moment, Serena invaded the headquarters of the Men in Black. Jay, who heard the siren, immediately took K with him to use the emergency escape device and leave the memory recovery room like flushing a toilet and came to the street. Jay used the computer in the car to monitor the situation at the headquarters, and contacted Frank to learn about the headquarters. Jay was going to use the memory restorer that was sent to him to restore K's memory. And looked at the portrait of the weapons store owner Jack displayed on the computer. A smile appeared on the corner of his mouth and he whispered. He turned out to be an old friend. The two came to Jack's shop and had a friendly conversation. Agent J put away his gun and followed the other person to the memory recovery device. After some operations, Agent K sat on the chair with white smoke coming from his mouth and was shot. Out. Nailed it. Jack showed a bright smile and came to Agent K's side with Agent J. The next second, Jack's blood spurted onto Agent J's face. Looking at this familiar scene, Agent J showed a smile on his face and whispered. Said. Have you regained your memory? No. Upon hearing the other party's answer, J said with confusion, then how do you know his head will grow back? A trace of surprise flashed across K's face and he said in a deep voice, can it grow back? Agent K left the basement with a displeased look on his face. He felt that the other party was playing tricks on him. When he walked out of the store, K looked up at the stars with a smile on his face. As soon as he returned to the basement, he saw Agent J being beaten. Boy, you still can't do it. Agent K defeated the last alien and looked at J lying on the ground with a hint of ridicule on his lips. After recovering his memory, he knew how stingy the other person was. I can handle everything. By the way, do you know about the Light of Sada? J rubbed his waist and stood up and started to change the topic. K took the lead and walked in front, shook his head and whispered, I should have erased this part of the memory. The two of them walked to the cab of the car at the same time. After looking at each other, Agent J said dissatisfiedly, what are you doing? Agent K said seriously, I've always been the one driving, and I've never forgotten that. Looking at the serious expression on his face, J suddenly remembered the previous scene of revenge against the other party. He took out the car keys and unlocked the car and handed it to the other party with some displeasure. Serena from the headquarters of the Men in Black tied up Z with a swarm of snakes and asked the other party to call Detective K. The police officer came back, and after a conversation, Z pretended to surrender and took advantage of the moment Serena answered the phone to make a sneak attack. After a few maneuvers, Z was whipped to the ground by Serena. She is bound to win the Light of Satyr this time. There is a rainbow bridge before Suryana dares to go too far for fear of causing Odin's dissatisfaction, but now she is confident to leave before Asgard's spaceship arrives. Earth. The two came to the pizza shop where the Sada star was killed. After a search, Agent J discovered a loophole in the photo on the wall. He took out the photo from Agent K's clothes and pasted it up and found that the person on it was pointing in a certain direction. This direction points to the astronauts. Agent J moved his body in the direction pointed by the figure on the wall, preparing to show off his smart brain in front of K. After some operations, J opened the cabinet and took out a box of canned fish. K picked up the key next to the photo and waved it in the air. Akira said calmly. I hope I didn't get in your way. Agent J felt that the air around him was suddenly quiet. If there were no outsiders, he smiled and passed by. Laura on the side looked at him with an expression that looked like an idiot. J wanted to use his feet to dig out a shelter. Agent J found the Zerg clan and asked him to help him take care of Laura. Then he followed K to the locker of the central station and found a watch and a card to the video store. The two went round and round to the video store and found the videotape that was there at the beginning. K looked at the Queen of Sada star Lorna in it and instantly remembered the scene at that time. At that time, he violated the code of the man in black and chose to help Lorna hide. The Light of Sada. Agent J contacted Laura and confirmed that the other party was holding the bracelet in K's memory, and then connected Frank's communicator to tell the other party that he was going to get the Light of Sada. Serpentina used Frank's voice to deal with J and then led a group of men towards the place where the other party said. When the two arrived, Laura had been taken away by Serpentina. K took J to the place where he used to live. Open the hidden arsenal and choose the weapon you want. The two of them fought all the way to the headquarters and rescued Laura. The three of them came to a rooftop together and looked around and whispered, "Where is the Light of Sada?" Agent K stretched out his finger and pointed at Laura. J's expression changed and she leaned on the car with some discomfort. Laura turned her head and looked at J and said with some choking, "This is not fair. This is life." A wry smile appeared on J's face. At this moment, Serena rushed to the top of the building and roared at the three of them. After a fierce battle, the two of them blew up Serena and turned it into a burst of beautiful fireworks. Yehu, who had just returned from the bottom of the sea, stood on the beach admiring the scenery. He looked at the fleeting spaceship in the night sky with a flash of surprise in his eyes. Just as he was about to leave, he saw a piece of flesh and blood falling next to him. He looked at the snakes that the other party had reproduced. Group, Yehu instantly remembered the female boss Serpentina in Men in Black. His eyes flashed slightly and two heat rays blasted the minced meat on the ground into powder. Although the other party is very sexy, his strength is too poor and those snakes are too disgusting. When he returns home, Yehu uses Alyssa to contact Yvonne and ask him to come and find him. 2 days later, in the Shield Sanatorium, Steve Rogers slowly opened his eyes and frowned slightly as he listened to the live football game played on the radio. He remembered that he had watched the game live. How could it be broadcast in real time? Moreover, he had previously flown a plane into a glacier. Looking at the surrounding environment, Steve remembered his date with Carter. He quickly stood up and walked to the door, praying in his heart that he would not miss the time. The nurse responsible for taking care of Steve specially wore a nurse uniform from the last century and pushed in the door. Steve, who saw the flaw in the game, pointed it out directly. The nurse subconsciously called for backup. Looking at the guard in strange clothes, Steve thought it was Jatu. The snake man noticed him first, knocked the two of them away and ran outside. Steve, who rushed out of the building, looked at the passing cars with a flash of confusion in his eyes. The tall buildings he had never seen around him made him at a loss and could only run desperately to try to find a building he was familiar with. Chapter 47 Avengers Alliance. Don't be nervous, soldier. Nick Fury stepped out of the car and looked at Steve and said calmly, "I apologize for my previous performance. I thought you needed a slow adaptation process to accept everything now." Steve had a wary look on his face and said in a cold tone, "Accept what?" Nick Fury looked at Steve solemnly and said unhurriedly, "You have been sleeping for 70 years, Captain." Steve's pupils shrank in disbelief, but the buildings around him forced him to believe it all. Thinking of his date with Carter, Steve had a look of pain on his face. Listening to the other party's rapid breathing, Nick Fury said worriedly, "Are you okay, Captain?" "No. It's okay, it's just that I missed an important appointment. Steve looked at the surrounding buildings with a bitter smile on his face. The war was victorious, but he felt at a loss about the future. He found that he had nothing but fighting. Yes, an unprecedented sense of loneliness enveloped him. A month later, Nick Fury took Hill off the helicopter and whispered to Coulson, "How bad is it?" "Sir, the situation is not clear. 4 hours ago, the cosmic cube emitted an energy," Coulson pressed the elevator and continued, "and this energy is still rising sharply. Evacuate the crowd as soon as possible." Nick Fury stared at Coulson with a serious face. After the other party left, Hill said helplessly, "Sir, if you can't control the energy of the cosmic cube, everything will be in vain." Nick Fury glanced sideways at Hill and said angrily, "If you don't do this, do you want me to tell everyone to go back to sleep? You go and supervise their evacuation." Hill nodded and turned around to lead the people away. Dr. Eric walked forward quickly and whispered, "The cosmic Rubik's Cube suddenly burst out with energy and refused to obey orders. You didn't try to cut off the power." After hearing what Nick Fury said, Dr. Eric said angrily, "Sir, this thing itself is an energy source." Just as the two were discussing how to solve the problem, Thanos on the other side of the universe was using the gem on the Mind Scepter to communicate with the universe. The Rubik's Cube was preparing to open an unstable temporary channel. In order to prevent Loki from dying in the channel, Thanos handed over the Mind Scepter. "Defend the other party." Thanos looked at the disappearing energy channel and raised the corner of his mouth slightly. His plan finally ushered in the most important step. Now he only needs to kill Ronan, the arrogant idiot, and get back the Power Stone to invade the Earth. Thinking of Ronan's arrogant appearance in the projection before, Thanos showed a trace of disdain on his lips, really thinking that he could fight him with a Power Stone. The cosmic cube in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s underground research room suddenly erupted with a powerful energy, and the ground began to shake violently. The people who were evacuating subconsciously accelerated their pace. After the energy dissipated, Loki squatted on the ground and his chest heaved violently. The scepter was crushed into powder by the power of space. Several S.H.I.E.L.D. agents slowly approached Loki with submachine guns, and Nick Fury shouted, "Sir, please put down your spear." Loki looked down at the Mind Scepter, curled his lips and fired an energy beam at Nick Fury. Hawkeye pushed Nick Fury away hard, and the violent explosion made several agents subconsciously pull the trigger. The bullet hit Loki and picked up a burst of sparks. Following a few energy beams, the surrounding area instantly became quiet. Loki came to the young Hawkeye and whispered, "You have some qualifications." After saying that, he hit Hawkeye's chest with his scepter. After a struggle, Hawkeye put down his pistol and followed Loki with a submissive expression. Nick Fury suppressed the shock in his heart and slowly came to the side of the cosmic Rubik's Cube and loaded the opponent into it. Box. Loki, who was using the scepter to control Dr. Eric, said without looking back, "Put it down. That's not something you should own." 10 minutes later, Loki took the Rubik's Cube and slowly left the city in a car driven by Hawkeye. The next second, the entire city center began to collapse downwards, and a large amount of dust covered the sky. Nick Fury pursued Loki in a helicopter but was shot down by the energy beam emitted by the other party with a scepter. Nick Fury stood in front of the wreckage of the helicopter, stared sharply at the direction Loki was leaving, pressed the communicator and said in a deep voice, "Gather all our forces together, we are going to start a full-scale war with each other." Coulson and the others showed serious expressions on their faces. Natasha, who was on a mission, immediately put down the mission when she heard that Barton was being controlled by the enemy. Patton and Natasha, who are both teachers and friends, would not let them go. "Natasha, you go take care of the big guy, and I'll take care of the big guy. As for that guy who hides his head and shows his tail, the director will take care of it himself." After Coulson finished speaking, he immediately hung up the phone without giving Natasha a chance to refute. He didn't want to mess with Banner. Natasha put down the phone and shook her head helplessly, then turned and walked towards the helicopter parked at the end of the street. Banner, who was hiding in the slums, was tricked into a wooden house by a little girl and looked at her back after jumping out of the window. With a bitter smile on her lips, she immediately knew that she was being watched. Banner looked at Natasha, who came out slowly, and said in a flat tone, "It's a good choice to lead me to a place far away from the city. There should be a lot of people around." Banner walked to the window and looked out without worrying about being shot in the head. Natasha showed a smile on her face and said in a low voice, "Dr. Banner, we have been invaded by aliens. This world needs you. On behalf of SHIELD, I invite you to resist the invasion together. A look of emotion flashed across Banner's face. After hard work, he was able to temporarily control the Hulk, and he didn't mind using this power to defend the Earth, but only if what the other party said was true. Who do you want me to hit? Banner took a deep breath and decided to trust him. Natasha took out her phone and clicked on a picture and said softly, "This thing is called the Cosmic Rubik's Cube. It has the power to destroy the world. Now it is a gang of bad guys has taken it from us and we need you to track the gamma signal it emits." When it comes to energy rays, Banner immediately became interested. This is his specialty. After thinking for a while, Banner nodded. Even if the other party lied to him, Hulk could lead him out of the encirclement. After Stark installed the new energy, he was going to have a romantic candlelight dinner with Potts. At this moment, Coulson invaded Jarvis's system and came to the top floor of the Stark building, and handed a document to Stark. Kay said anxiously, "I think you should finish this quickly." Potts next to Stark smiled and took the document from Coulson's hand, saying in a low voice, "He doesn't like to accept things that are handed to him." Coulson felt offended watching Stark reach out to take the document Potts handed him, but he couldn't say anything because of the emergency. After all, the opponent's combat effectiveness is still very good. After reading the information, Tony said goodbye to Potts. Leave Stark Tower with Coulson. Chapter 48 Gathering. Nick Fury came to the boxing gym and looked at Steve, who exploded the sandbag, and whispered, "Are you still used to it?" "Captain." "Sir, do you have a mission?" Nick Fury nodded and said in a low voice, "You can read this document before making a decision." Steve picked up a sandbag and took the documents and walked towards the residence upstairs. After leaving the boxing gym, Nick Fury came to Yehu's residence and knocked lightly on the door. Yehu, who was watching TV, used his mental power to twist the door. The handler never took his eyes off the beauty pageant for a moment. "You are very leisurely, the aliens have declared war on us. I need you. The people of this city need you." Yehu raised his eyelids when he heard the words and said angrily, "It's none of my business, the sky is falling and a tall one will hold it up." Nick Fury sighed slightly in his heart. This kind of person is undoubtedly the most difficult to control, but this time the enemy is Loki. He is not sure whether Asgard will be involved. With Yehu in his corner, the chance of winning will be much improved. He doesn't want to because this matter called Carol back, and after thinking for a while, Nick Fury gritted his teeth and said, 1 million. It's not about money. 10 million. Yehu raised his eyebrows and said helplessly, "This matter has nothing to do with money, I don't want to go into troubled waters." Nick Fury frowned slightly and whispered, "Do you have any information?" Nick Fury couldn't help thinking about the identity of the other alien. A series of conspiracies suddenly appeared in his mind. Yehu withdrew his eyes and stopped watching the commercials on the TV. He turned his head and looked at Nick Fury, who was standing aside, and said softly, "I'll sell you a piece of news for 10 million. Nick Fury's eyes flashed slightly and he nodded after hesitating for a second. Yehu leaned his head on the sofa and said unhurriedly, "The Kiritan army will join this battle. The existence behind them is too terrifying and I don't want to participate. A battle between you." Nick Fury took a deep look at Yehu and said in a calm tone, "I will call you the money later. We can still defend the Earth without you. The worst is death." After saying that, he stood up and walked towards the door, seeing that Yehu had no intention of stopping him. Nick Fury gritted his teeth and put his hand on the doorknob. "Boss, we shouldn't just sit idly by." After hearing Jessica's words, Nick Fury turned his lips slightly and turned to look at Jessica standing at the top of the stairs with a serious face and said word by word, "I don't care what you did before, but this crisis on the Earth requires you." Jessica felt the blood in her body boiling. Going out with Matt to do heroic things made her feel a sense of responsibility, so she tried to persuade them after hearing about the alien army. Yehu looked at Jessica, who was so excited by Nick Fury's few words, and said in a bad tone, "Shut up and go back. This matter is not as simple as you think." Jessica pouted and stood there looking at Yehu with a stubborn expression. Nick Fury saw this and said quickly, "I can understand that you don't want to contribute to the Earth, but you can't stop others from contributing to the Earth. That's enough. Stop showing off your eloquence to me." Yehu smashed the coffee table in front of him, stood up, stared at Jessica and said coldly, "Go back." There was a flash of hesitation in Jessica's eyes, and Nick Fury whispered, "Everyone is responsible for facing the cosmic war. Jessica's eyes gradually became firm after hearing this. She stared at Yihu and said in a deep voice, "Boss, I'm going to help them." Yihu closed his eyes and his chest rose slightly. After experiencing several worlds, he no longer had the kind-heartedness he once had. When faced with this kind of conflict and war without interest, the first thing he thought of was to just hang up and ignore the matter. Guyi, the Men, Brotherhood, Hellfire Club and others will not let the Chiritans destroy the earth, and the normal Thanos will not come to the earth easily. Yihu didn't want to participate in this kind of war that was doomed to fail from the beginning, but Jessica's attitude made him a little shaken. The other party was his friend. Yihu didn't want to break up with the other party because of such a trivial matter. After a few seconds of silence, Yihu opened his mouth. Staring at Nick Fury, he whispered. This war was started by you. The powerful alien races are all peeking at the cube. The energy generated by you using it to study weapons is a bright light in the dark night for them. In the past, there was Asgard's rainbow. They didn't dare mess around when the bridge was there, but now that the rainbow bridge has been destroyed, those people have lost their scruples. Yihu raised his hand to stop Nick Fury, who wanted to speak, and whispered, "For once, I will not wipe someone else's butt." The corner of Nick Fury's mouth curled up slightly, feeling that he had found Yihu's weakness. If he couldn't fool an alien, he couldn't fool a woman. He took out a document and said softly. This is the information I compiled. Mr. Yi can take a look. No need. Yihu waved his hand and said calmly, I'm not interested in this information. Jessica quickly stepped forward and took the file from Nick Fury's hand and watched him leave. When she turned around, she saw the gloomy face of her boss. It is everyone's responsibility to protect the earth. Jessica muttered a few words and then ran upstairs with the file. Yihu sighed and sat on the sofa again. He looked at the communicator left by Nick Fury on the sofa and curled his lips in disdain. I decided in my heart that during the battle, there were too many big guys in this city, and I was not a lumber disc, so I didn't need to protrude so much. When Jessica returned to the room, she looked at the information in the file and felt that her life had been in vain all these years. Fighting bad guys was not as fun as fighting aliens. She decided to tell Matt about this later when she went out to look for cats. Nick Fury got into the cab of his car and decided to focus on Jessica, trying to trick her into joining the Avengers, so that he could use Yihu's alien intelligence channel for nothing. Steve was sitting on the Quinjet, flipping through information about Stark and others. Coulson, who was sitting across from him, kept looking for topics. He had been listening to each other's legends since he was a child, and he joined S.H.I.E.L.D. to fulfill his dreams. Ideal, seeing the living idol talking a lot more than usual at this moment, Steve felt like 1,000 ducks were quacking in his ears. Can you sign my collection of cards? Steve nodded slowly as he looked at the other party's excited expression. He would not refuse such a small request. During the war, someone would ask him to sign his underwear. Thinking of this, Steve couldn't help but think of Carter's cold eyes and the corners of his mouth slightly raised. Warped. The Quinjet slowly landed on an aircraft carrier. As soon as Steve got off the ground, he saw a confused Banner in the distance. He strolled forward and stretched out his hand and said in a deep voice. Hello, Dr. Banner. Hello. Banner smiled and shook hands with Steve. The aircraft carrier slowly took off and entered stealth mode. Looking at the busy people, Banner whispered, Where is my studio? Maybe I can help you narrow down some areas. Nick Fury winked at Natasha, and at the same time Dr. Eric made the reflective shell, but in order to stabilize the space door, iridium elements were needed. What do you need? Loki walked up to Hawkeye, who was about to set off, with a calm look on his face. Barton picked up the longbow and said in a deep voice, A little chaos and a little iris. Chapter 49 Arrival. The agent responsible for tracking Loki in the aircraft carrier shouted, Director, we found the target in the camera at 28 Cunin Street. Nick Fury stepped forward to check and confirmed that it was Loki, then turned to Steve and said, Captain, it's your turn to go now. Loki entered the venue to find his target and inserted the iris extractor into the opponent's eye socket to help Hawkeye remotely open the safe containing the iridium element. Just as Loki was trumpeting his dominance, Steve fell from the sky holding the shield. Loki raised his psychic scepter and fired an energy beam at the opponent, but Steve bounced back with his shield and knocked him into the air. After a fight, neither of them could do anything to each other. BGM dropped a palm cannon from the sky and knocked Loki away, then opened all weapons and aimed at the opponent and said in a deep voice. Make a move, little dear. Seeing this, Loki removed the divine antler armor on his body and slowly dissipated. He raised his hands and showed a harmless expression. Stark put away his weapon and whispered, "Good boy." The two took Loki to the Quinjet fighter piloted by Natasha, and Steve slowly approached Tony and whispered, "I feel something is wrong. He was very good at fighting just now, how could he surrender so easily?" Stark looked at Loki in the corner of his eyes with a trace of disdain on his face, and said in a flat tone, "I didn't expect you to be so agile at an age. How do you usually exercise? Do you do aerobics?" Steve's face suddenly became extremely ugly when he heard this, and the good impression he had for Tony because of Howard Stark disappeared instantly. At the same time, Heimdall, who had observed everything, reported the matter to Odin. Knowing that Loki is not dead, Odin's eyes flashed with joy, and the infinite energy of the Rubik's Cube can just be used to repair the Rainbow Bridge. Thinking of this, Odin asked Thor to tell him about the matter. The two went all the way to the depths of Asgard. Thor looked at the dark energy device in front of him and immediately understood that Odin wanted to use this to send him to the earth. Feeling the violent dark energy, Thor whispered, "Father, can you control it?" Odin's cheeks twitched slightly, feeling offended, and he said in a bad tone, "Although it will cost you something, it's not a big problem. Remember to bring Loki and the cube back with you. Without them, you can't return to Asgard." As soon as he finished speaking, he began to manipulate the huge and violent dark energy to open a channel for Thor. 10 seconds later, Odin dispersed the divine power in his hand and leaned weakly on the stone pillar with his hands shaking. He somewhat underestimated the violence of dark energy. A large amount of divine power was expended just now to protect Thor, and it would be difficult to recover in a short time. At the same time, thunder flashed above the Quinjet. Steve looked at the shaking Loki and said disdainfully, "What's wrong? Are you afraid of thunder?" "I'm afraid of the person who followed thunder." The fear of being dominated by Mjolnir appeared in Loki's mind. Stark's eyes focused on the other person's identity and he immediately guessed who it was. Thor landed on top of the Quinjet. Hearing the noise, Stark put on his helmet and opened the hatch. Looking at the figure suspended in the air, he subconsciously raised his palm cannon. Thor gently waved Mjolnir and knocked Stark away. "Grab Loki and run." After being beaten, Stark was very dissatisfied and immediately chased after him. Steve thought about it for a while, picked up his parachute and chased out. Today he will fight for the elderly. Natasha, who was piloting the fighter plane, shook her head when she saw this. Thor threw Loki to the ground hard and said in a deep voice, "I'm not in the mood to play around with you. Tell me where the cube is. You should thank me." After the Rainbow Bridge was destroyed, how much dark energy did the Father of the Gods gather to send you to your precious Earth? Seeing the ungrateful smile on Loki's face, Thor became furious. He grabbed Loki and roared, "I thought you were dead. We all mourned for you, and so did my father." "That's your father." Loki pushed Thor away and said in a low voice, "He should have told you my life experience." Thor's eyes flashed with tears and he said in a sad voice, "Don't you remember that we grew up together, played together, and fought together? I only remember a shadow." Loki turned around and whispered with tears in his eyes, "I have been shrouded in your shadow since I was a child. I have always wanted to compete fairly with you. That throne is mine." Thor heard this and said angrily, "So you come to harm the world I cherish to satisfy your imagination? Stop dreaming, Loki, I will protect the earth. Why can't I rule this kind of race that only kills each other? I saw a lot of things during my exile." A look of madness flashed across Loki's face. Thor stepped forward, grabbed Loki's collar and whispered, "Put down the unrealistic thoughts in your mind, hand over the cube and go home with me." Loki's eyes flashed slightly when he heard the word "go home." When he was floating in the silent universe, he didn't want to go home all the time, but he didn't want to go back in such a mess. He wanted to go back as the ruler of Midgard to defeat Odin. "Recognize your talents. I don't have the Rubik's Cube in my hand." Loki looked at Thor with a cry and a smile and said unhurriedly, "You can't take me back without it. I had someone move it. Now I don't know where it is." Thor raised Mjolnir and said in a deep voice, "Listen to me, brother." As soon as he finished speaking, he was knocked away by the suit driven by Stark. Loki suppressed the joy in his heart and whispered, "Listen to me, brother." Stark held Thor and fell into the cliff. He felt that this so-called god was nothing more than that. With the armor on him, he was confident that he could kill the god. Thor's eyes narrowed and he swung Mjolnir and hit Tony on the chest, knocking him 10 meters away. Stark reluctantly looked at the damage map of the mecha sent by Jarvis, his face darkened, he stood up and fired a palm cannon at the opponent. The anger in Thor's heart continued to rise. Although this attack could not break the defense, it hurt. Thor raised Mjolnir high and caused the thunder to hit Stark. After a burst of sparks flickered, Stark listened to Jarvis's report that the energy increased by 400%. The corners of his mouth raised slightly and he whispered, "Not bad." After speaking, he raised his hand and blasted Thor away with a cannon. After a battle, Thor put down Mjolnir and fought with Stark hand to hand. With the blessing of divine power, he squeezed the armor on Stark's arms so that sparks shot out. Tiff fell from the sky and separated the two. Seeing someone interfering, Thor didn't hold on. He stretched out his hand to calm Mjolnir back and looked at the two of them with cold eyes. Steve saw this and whispered, "I don't know what you want." Thor didn't want to get into too much trouble with the people on Earth. Hearing this, he quickly said, "I'm here to stop Loki's conspiracy." "Then prove it with actions." Steve stared at Thor with sharp eyes and said in a deep voice, "Put the hammer down now." Stark on the side quickly said, "This is not a good idea." Chapter 50 Looking for the Rubik and number 039, S-Cube. Hearing Steve asking him to put down his beloved hammer, Thor's face sank and he hammered away Stark, jumped into the sky and raised Mjolnir, ready to teach Steve a lesson. The shield and the hammer collided together, and the strong air waves blew away the surrounding trees. Thor looked at the unharmed Steve and admired the other's bravery. He liked to make friends with such people. The three of them took Loki back to the aircraft carrier and asked a team of agents to escort each other to the cell. When passing by Banner's research room, Loki's lips slightly raised. He had learned about the opponent's combat power from the internet. Nick Fury came outside the cell and whispered, "Don't even try to escape, otherwise you will fall from a height of 9,000 meters. Loki glanced at the open passage under the cell and whispered, "This is probably not specially prepared for me." Nick Fury heard this and whispered, "Of course. This is built for something more powerful than you." "I heard something." Loki turned around and looked at the camera and said slowly, "It's obviously a stupid beast but it pretends to be a human being. How panicked do you have to be to treat such a beast as a rescuer?" Nick Fury stared at Loki and said word by word, "You threatened to go to war with our world, and stole uncontrollable energy. You talked about peace but took pleasure in killing. You forced me to. You will do whatever it takes. You will also pay the price." Loki shrugged and started walking around in the cell. Yehu, who was sitting in the research room, glanced at the smiling Banner and whispered, "I think he is talking about himself, talking about world peace, but privately speaking about the universe. The Rubik's Cube makes powerful weapons, and after the incident was exposed, he used the comfort of all mankind to force us to wipe his butt." Hearing the words in the earphone, Nick Fury's face darkened and he lost his mood to interrogate Loki. Stark glanced at Yehu who was doing nothing and whispered, "How do you know they are researching powerful weapons?" Seeing everyone turn their attention to him, Yehu shrugged and whispered, "That thing is usually just a small square, but when it is stimulated, it will emit energy fluctuations like a bright light in the dark night, illuminating alien civilization way forward." Yehu slowly walked to the spiritual scepter, picked it up and observed it carefully. Suddenly, a line of words appeared in front of him. "Do you want to use the fusion card to absorb the Mind Stone?" Looking at the options in front of him, Yehu felt a huge wave in his heart. He opened them all and found that there was a fusion card next to the ability extraction card, which can absorb the abilities of some items into the body. Before, Yehu just wanted to use the ability extraction card to extract the power of the Phoenix, but now he feels that he can take the 6-gem route. Thanos, who has collected the 6 Infinity Stones, has reached the peak of the multiverse. He can control the gods of eternity, death, and other multiverse realms at will. Although the Phoenix power can also grow to the peak of the multiverse, it will take time. Thinking of the ability to fuse the 6 stones, Yehu felt a little excited at the scene. After thinking for a while, he decided to fuse the cosmic cube first so that Asgard would not be able to repair the Rainbow Bridge in a short time. Odin put too much pressure on him and it was best not to meet him. The corner of Yehu's mouth slightly raised as he looked forward to the upcoming battle. He couldn't help but care about his own interests. Thor put Mjolnir on the table and said calmly, "Yehu is right. My father left the cosmic cube on Earth just to hide it." With Thor's support, everyone immediately believed the 7th or 8th level. Stark smiled and came to Yehu's side and whispered, "What price did Nick Fury pay for you to take action?" Yehu rolled his eyes at Stark and said angrily, "Am I the kind of mercenary person in your mind?" Stark looked up and down and nodded vigorously. Yehu felt a little tight in his chest. Thor beside him had a good impression of Yehu. The other person's extraordinary strength and knowledge made him feel like he was facing his peers in the divine realm. Thor walked up to Yehu and hugged his shoulders and whispered, "Let's go have a drink later. I miss the earth very much since we left last time." Yehu rolled his eyes and said angrily, "I think you want Coca-Cola burgers." Ha 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 ha. Hearing everyone's laughter, Thor subconsciously increased the strength of his hands to strangle this guy who was telling the truth. Steve whispered, "Loki is stalling for time. Thor, do you have any information?" After hearing Steve's words, Thor slowly let go of his hand and warned Yehu not to talk nonsense with his eyes, and then whispered, "He has an army of Kirita. He probably wants to use the cosmic cube to open a space door and lead an army to invade the Earth. I guess he will give the Rubik's Cube to the other party in the end." Banner thought for a while and then whispered, "I think we shouldn't focus on Loki. He is an out-and-out lunatic. Be careful what you say." Thor glared at Banner and said solemnly, "No matter how brutal Loki is, he is still the Prince of Asgard and my brother." "Really?" Yehu raised the corner of his mouth slightly and whispered, "I remember he killed a lot of people in Old Bridge Town last time, and this time he killed dozens more people. Is this how Asgard rules the 9 kingdoms?" Upon hearing this, Thor coughed twice and lost his previous momentum, and whispered, "Actually, he was adopted." Natasha left the laboratory with a smile. Just now, Nick Fury used encrypted communication to ask her to interrogate Loki. After some exchanges, Natasha was broken by Loki, who was good at playing with people's hearts. Although she learned of Loki's plan, she felt sad in her heart. "Can't calm down." Yehu did not goad Thor to prevent him from fighting when his heartstrings were touched by the Mind Stone, and casually found an excuse to leave the laboratory. After Yehu left, Stark picked up the electric shock stick and stabbed Banner desperately. Steve, who was worried that the opponent would go berserk, quickly went to stop him. After an argument, Stark said that Nick Fury was not trustworthy. This topic aroused Banner's interest. He disliked the profession of agents very much, which reminded him of many unpleasant things. Steve was also struck by Tony's words. He accepted this task because he did not know Nick Fury well. Simply because it's boring. At this moment, when Stark provoked him, a desire to explore immediately emerged in his heart. After leaving the laboratory, Steve quickly came to the confidential warehouse. Looking at the energy weapons inside, the words of Yehu and Thor came to mind. He didn't care much about it before. But now that the facts were in front of him, he couldn't help but believe it. Thinking of Nick Fury's unauthorized study of the cosmic cube, which attracted the prying eyes of alien races, Steve became angry. He worked hard to take the cosmic cube back from the Red Skull, and even missed a date to do so. In exchange for this ending, Steve, who became more and more angry as he thought about it, picked up the energy weapon and walked to the laboratory. Nick Fury, who was in the command room, got the news from Natasha and was about to go to the laboratory when he heard that the report database had been invaded. Chapter 51, on the verge of breaking out. "You should be looking for the Rubik's Cube now instead of invading my database." Nick Fury had an angry expression on his face. Stark pointed to the instrument on the side and whispered, "We will find the Rubik's Cube when the progress bar runs out. Can you talk to us now about this so-called second phase of research?" Steve pushed open the door and threw the energy weapon on the ground and said in a bad tone, "The second phase is when S.H.I.E.L.D. uses the cosmic cube to research weapons." Nick Fury's heart sank when he saw Steve's distrustful gaze. Just as he was about to make up some lies to fool him, he saw Stark turning out S.H.I.E.L.D.'s research drawings. At this moment, Natasha took the cable with her. Walked into the laboratory and looked at Banner and said in a deep voice, "You should stay away from here now, Doctor." Banner felt that his good intentions were being misunderstood, and said in a bad tone, "You were the one who invited me here in the first place. Loki wants to control you." Natasha slowly walked towards Banner and her eyes became very sharp. Banner laughed angrily and said, "Don't you? Now you should explain why you want to research this kind of weapon." Infected by the atmosphere in the room, Nick Fury raised his hand and pointed at Thor, and said angrily, "Because of him. Last year he fought with a robot in Old Bridge and almost destroyed a town. In order to raise my head in front of aliens in the future, I have to take risks and research energy weapons." Just as a few people were arguing, Hawkeye rode a Quinjet to the side of the aircraft carrier and fired an arrow under the number 3 engine. The violent explosion blew everyone in the research room away. Banner could no longer control his emotions and began to transform. Hulk! Natasha, who fell with him, quickly comforted the other party. Hulk, who was rarely seen once, refused to give up this opportunity no matter what. After transforming, he remembered Natasha's previous cynicism, roared and rushed towards the other party, preparing to kill him and give it to Banner. Take it out! The two chased and escaped in the aircraft carrier. A large number of buildings were destroyed. Just when Hulk was about to trample Natasha to death, Thor arrived in time and knocked him away. The two began to fight. As the anger accumulated, Hulk and Thor fought. There are back and forth. Nick Fury, who was well aware of the dangers of the Hulk, ordered a fighter jet to attract fire. The pilot looked at the two fighting inside the glass window and quickly pulled the trigger to help Thor. The angry Hulk rushed towards the fighter jet facing the bullet, jumped onto the back of the fighter jet and hammered hard, grabbed the ejected pilot, hesitated for a second, and threw the pilot far away, and then fell together with the fighter jet. After Coulson came to the weapons depot to verify his identity, he picked up the energy weapon inside and prepared to go to the cell to guard Loki. Several members of the Special Operations team broke into the command room and were killed by Nick Fury. Hawkeye hid in the pipe and took the opportunity to use arrows to hack the air carrier's system, causing the number 1 engine to go out. The air carrier, which had lost 2 engines in the same direction, began to tilt. After repelling Hawkeye, Nick Fury pressed the communicator and shouted, "Yee-hoo, go and support Stark and the others now." Listening to the gunshots coming from Steve's side, Yee-hoo curled his lips and walked towards Engine 3 in a hurry. Hill used the communicator to inform everyone about Hawkeye going to the cell. When Thor arrived with Mjolnir, he happened to see the hatch open and Loki come out. He yelled and rushed towards the opponent and successfully locked himself in the cell. When Loki saw Thor, who was still the same as before, the corners of his mouth rose slightly. Before he could say a few words, Coulson pointed an energy weapon at his body. Coulson, who had no divine power, could not determine Loki's true identity. The opponent sneak attacked from behind. No. Watching Coulson slam the Death Thor against the glass wall with Mjolnir, Loki chuckled and walked to the console and threw the cell from a high altitude. Coulson took advantage of Loki's relaxation and used his last strength to pull the trigger. Knock the opponent away. Yee-hoo slowly walked to the number 3 engine and used his mental power to throw the Special Operations team member who shot at Steve off the aircraft carrier and turned the wrench to free Stark from the propeller. Natasha met Hawkeye in the passage and after a fight, she accidentally hit the opponent's head. After hearing Barton's familiar name, she hesitated for a second and then knocked the opponent unconscious. At this moment, news came from the communicator that Loki had escaped from the aircraft carrier Coulson and died in the line of duty. Steve and Stark had grief-stricken looks on their faces. The three of them came to the conference room and Nick Fury handed over a pile of bloodstain through the card in front of Steve and said softly. "This was found in Coulson's arms. It seems he didn't ask for your signature." Nick Fury began to play the emotional card to stand on the moral high ground, preparing to use this opportunity to make several people feel guilty and become his thugs. Steve picked up the card with a look of remorse and looked at the patterns inside without saying anything for a long time. Stark turned around and ignored Nick Fury. He poured a glass of water and looked at where the other person was performing his one-man show with amusement. After some low-pitched narration, Nick Fury began to explain his ultimate goal, the Avengers' plan, and wanted to use Coulson's death to force several people to join the plan. He wanted to believe that as long as they cooperated once, there would be a second time. If this continued, one day he can completely control this team. "I'm not interested in what you're talking about. Let me know when you find Loki." Yee-hoo stood up and drank the water in the cup and walked straight to the door. The Avengers could not bring him any benefits but would face a lot of trouble. Yee-hoo would not do such a thankless thing. Nick Fury stared at Yee-hoo's leaving back with cold eyes. Someone took the lead and Stark quickly got up and left. Now he was a little confused. Coulson's death reminded him of the deaths of those soldiers when he was kidnapped. After some thinking, Stark understood Loki's thoughts, and quickly flew back to Stark Tower to look at the instruments on the rooftop. He suddenly wanted to use the palm cannon to destroy the opponent, but was blocked by an invisible energy. The violent impact knocked Dr. Eric unconscious. Loki slowly walked into the house on the top floor and looked at Stark with interest. After a conversation, Loki smiled and tapped Stark's chest gently with the Mind Scepter. On the reactor, the smile on his face disappeared in the next second. This was the first time Loki met someone who could block the charm of the soul. The angry Loki grabbed Stark's neck and threw him from the top floor, avoiding the impact of the steel armor. A few seconds later, Stark flew back to the window and hit Loki with a palm cannon. At this moment, the instrument completed charging and fired a light blue beam of light into the sky, and a space gate appeared above the city. A large number of Kirita soldiers entered the city from the other side of the universe. Stark drove the suit and rushed towards the Kirita army in an attempt to intercept them. The crowd on the street looked up at the sky in surprise and shouted to stay away from Stark Tower. On a tall building in the distance, Ancient One casually pulled hundreds of Kirita soldiers into the mirror space to deal with them, and then repeated the previous actions. Chapter 52 Battle. Loki stood up and walked out of the house on the top floor. The antler armor slowly covered his body. The explosion below made him feel extremely comfortable. He felt a thrill of destroying his brother's beloved thing. He was even happier than when he turned into a snake to scare Thor. At this moment, Hawkeye flew a Quinjet and took Steve and Natasha into the battle. The disparity in numbers made the three of them watch civilians being killed by Kirita soldiers. In a secret base, Jinping sat on the sofa and watched the scene on TV with veins popping out on his forehead. Many of those bombed-out places were his property. Ever since he offended Yehu, he had never left the underground base. He always remotely controlled two guys similar to himself to walk outside. "Erica, bring someone to kill those monsters for me immediately." Kingpin hung up the phone and took 2 puffs of his cigar. At the same time, organizations such as the X-Men and the Brotherhood sent out manpower to attack the Kirita soldiers. Magneto flew in the air with Wanda and Pietro. The energy weapons of the Kirita soldiers could not penetrate his magnetic field at all. Pietro watched Eric crush hundreds of Kirita soldiers with a wave of his hand, with admiration in his eyes. "Look!" Eric, who saw all this with his peripheral vision, slightly raised the corner of his mouth. After having children, he once again had hope in his heart, and he was not as extreme in doing things as before, and he was ready to turn the fraternity into a family business for Pietro or Wanda inheritance. Magneto's change made all his subordinates breathe a sigh of relief. In the past, their boss was famous for being cold-blooded and ruthless. Now, although he is still cold-blooded, he has a little more humanity. Wanda on the side had no intention of taking action. She enjoyed the feeling of being protected. In an alley, Matt held a guide stick and fought with 2 Kirita people. With the new force joining Steve and others, they immediately felt relaxed. Phew! The high-level government officials breathed a sigh of relief after seeing all this through the satellite. They had previously planned to use nuclear bombs to destroy the energy transmitters, but now that the situation was gradually under control, they all extinguished their thoughts. Looking at Magneto blocked in front of the portal, various lights flashed in the eyes of the senior management. Commander Kirita looked at Eric, who was blocked in front of the door, with a cruel look on his face. Although Lord Thanos repeatedly asked not to destroy the Earth, he couldn't care so much at the moment, and turned around and ordered his men to charge the secondary cannon. Eric floated in the air with his hands on his back and his children, looking invincible. Pietro's admiring eyes made Magneto feel that being a hero was not a bad thing. At this moment, an energy beam hit the magnetic field and hit the 3 of them. People shot out of the sky. "Ahem, are you okay? My father was careless just now." Eric glanced at his children and felt unbearable heat on their faces. Wanda and Pietro looked up at the sky and pretended that nothing had happened, but the corners of their mouths slightly raised. Magneto once again took the 2 of them to fly into the sky and prepared to regain their place. The powerful people around them, the magnetic field allows him to survive in the universe. Stark opened his mouth wide and looked at Magneto with a horrified look on his face as he led people through the space gate without any protection. In the next second, countless corpses fell from the space gate, including some large behemoths. Just as Magneto was getting ready to kill, several beams of light hit him. Eric frowned slightly and manipulated the magnetic field to distort the surrounding space and bounce the beam away. 2 minutes later, Magneto flew out of the space door with his children. The opponent, who was ungrateful in martial arts, used long-range attacks to hit him so hard that he couldn't raise his head. Commander Kirita breathed a sigh of relief after watching the God of Death leave. The images sent back by the ground troops made him hesitate to continue the attack. Loki, who was admiring his masterpiece on the roof, looked at the empty space door and his face gradually became ugly. Thor held Mjolnir and landed next to Loki. After a dispute, Loki took advantage of Thor's indulgence to stab him. The wounded opponent jumped on a Kirita aircraft and prepared to escape from the city. Without the Kirita army, he stayed here alone to deliver food. As soon as this thought came up, he saw a dozen giant monsters and a large number of Kirita soldiers pouring out of the space channel. Loki immediately returned to his calm posture. Thor hesitated for a second and then chose to support Steve and others. Yehu slowly came to the place where the two were fighting and picked up the psychic scepter dropped by Loki. He looked up at the space door and slowly walked to the launcher. He swung the psychic scepter through the energy field and knocked the cosmic cube away. The moment the Rubik's Cube left the energy field, she used her mental power to put it into her backpack, jumped off the building and left quickly. Natasha, who was about to go to Stark Tower, stopped when she saw the slowly closing space door, turned around and rushed towards the Kirita soldiers on the side. No! Loki, who was sitting on the aircraft, screamed and was hugged by Hulk and crashed into Stark Tower. Enough! You lowly beast, I am the Prince of Asgard. I am a god. Loki roared at Hulk and looked at the corner of the big man's mouth raised slightly by him. Before he could say a victory speech, Hulk grabbed his feet and pounded him back and forth. Hey, what a weak god! Hulk spat on the ground disdainfully. Loki crossed his hands on his chest and stared blankly at the ceiling, feeling that his life was dark. Yehu landed in the alley and took out the Rubik's Cube to crush the energy condensed outside, revealing the small space gem inside. Then he turned his attention to the ability extraction card in the backpack and silently used it in his mind. A card appeared above the gem and gradually turned into ashes. The space gem began to melt and finally completely penetrated into Yehu's hands. The huge energy traveled around in his body and raised big bags on his skin. After 5 minutes, the energy gradually subsided. Yehu shook his hands and felt that there was endless energy in his body and he was very sensitive to the surrounding space. As soon as he thought, a light blue space door immediately appeared in front of him. Looking at the familiar house opposite the door, Yehu raised the corners of his mouth slightly, stepped through the space door and appeared on the lawn in front of the house. Before Yehu could be happy, the space around him began to distort. A bald man wearing an orange monk's robe slowly walked towards him. Before the other party could speak, Yehu asked. I wonder what Master Guyi wants from me. I haven't seen you in the long river of time. Guyi's tone was as plain as asking what to eat tonight, but it stirred up huge waves in Yehu's heart. Although absorbing the space gem made him the strength has increased greatly, but Yehu has not yet expanded to the point where he can challenge Guyi alone. The opponent is very strong and with the eye of Agamotto hanging on his chest, he can hang himself up and fight in different ways. Yehu thought for a second and whispered. The master has really good vision. To be honest, I come from the earth in the parallel universe. I was brought here by the infinite god by chance. Guyi's eyes flashed slightly. She had made a promise with eternity to accompany him to travel the universe after death. Infinity was a big shot with the same name as eternity. Ancient Yi regarded Yehu as a follower of infinite. After chatting for a while, the two of them released the mirror space and let the other person leave. Chapter 53 New World. After leaving the mirror space, Yehu opened the door of the house with a key. After Stark's improvement, the house has undergone many changes, and the interior is much more luxurious than before. Welcome home, sir. Alyssa's projection bowed slightly towards Yehu, who no longer felt scary after watching King Kong Barbie too much, and Dabai, who was in a daze at the corner, walked in small steps when he heard the movement coming over. Yehu said quickly. I don't need to check, thank you. Dabai opened his hands and blinked his small eyes in a daze, a little at a loss. Yehu learned from Alyssa that Jessica was going out to fight the Chirita people, and after hesitating for a while, he chose to ignore it. Jessica is not bad. There was no way the remaining Kirita forces could harm her. With a thought, Yehu opened the space door leading to the submarine laboratory. Ivan and the big boss who were working immediately stood on guard. Looking at the figure coming out of it, the two breathed their weapons and shouted respectfully. Boss. Yehu nodded and put the body of the Chirita soldier in the backpack in the warehouse and said in a low voice, study their technology well. Yes, boss. A gleam of light flashed in the eyes of Ivan and Ivan. They had watched the live broadcast of the city battle before, and they were very interested in this alien race. Yehu ignored the excited two and wandered around in the arsenal. There were the energy weapons of the alien boss Jack he had captured before, as well as the weapons brought back from the Pacific Rim world and Stark's new energy. When Stark was manipulating the architectural drawings in front of him, Yehu took care to write down the pictures. With the specific structure, Yvonne quickly made the things out, and merged with the name on the back panel of the space gem. The evaluation became Heavenly Father level. Yihu understands that he, the Heavenly Father, has a lot of water. He has only reached the level of the Heavenly Father in terms of energy storage. Not to mention Odin's strength to smash a galaxy with a wave, even the normal Thanos can beat him. But his life-saving ability is stronger than most Heavenly Fathers. After absorbing the power gem, he will be able to manipulate the huge energy in his body. With confidence in Odin's offline PK at its peak, Yihu decided to go to other worlds to relax. Incarnation Uchiha Madara makes the enemy dance in front of him and then slaps the enemy to death when he is most proud. Yihu took a few weapons at hand and told Yvonne a few words, then returned to the house and asked Elisa to tell Jessica that he had something to go on a long trip. Then I came to the bedroom on the third floor and stared at Xiao Yuer and Hua Wuqi in the world options, thinking of Zhang Huang with air bangs. Even though he knew that the other party couldn't beat him, he still couldn't help but think of the look that the other party raised his head when he was a child. The fear of domination. The reason why he chose this world is because Zhang Huang can take care of everyone without him doing it. Yihu only needs to kill the two people in the title in the final decisive battle, which is completely in line with his idea of relaxation. Yihu silently made sure that he disappeared from the room the next second and reappeared on a busy street. Although Yihu's dress stood out in the crowd, the people around him automatically understood this problem under the influence of his mental power. Ignore it. Yihu borrowed a startup fund from a kind-hearted man with a big heart and went to the restaurant to try ancient dishes. Have you heard that the number one in the world will hold a competition in 3 days to decide the new number one in the world? Hey! This time, the SA family is going to compete for the title of number one wrestler. Hey, this is not a big event. I think the big event has to be the Huashan sword discussion held in the Song dynasty. It is said that the treasure this time is the 9-yin manual left by the great master Huang Shang. This is nothing to you. A while ago, Hua Wuqi from the Yuhua Palace made a scene at the wedding banquet of the Minister of War's daughter and brought the groom back to the Yuhua Palace for execution. It was really satisfying. Yihu frowned slightly as he listened to the discussions among the people at the tables around him. After thinking about the plot of the best in the world, Yihu felt that the Iron Dan God Marquis might not be able to defeat the Blackened Emperor Zhang, even if Zhu Yuvu's power-absorbing technique was better than Jiang's. The Emperor's tricks can never surpass his own thermal energy rays. Thinking of this, Yihu said with some emotion. This broken panel is getting more and more proficient in bundling sales. After walking out of the restaurant, Yihu took a deep breath. Maybe it was an illusion. He felt that the ancient air was indeed more comfortable than the modern one. Unknowingly, he walked outside the door of the number one restaurant in the world. Looking at the lively crowd, he couldn't help but wonder whether his M1911 could be used. Winning the title of the best hidden weapon in the world. Yihu entered the number one village in the world and successfully killed 21 hidden weapon masters in a row with the M19911. He successfully won the title of the number one hidden weapon in the world this year. He only needs to defeat the current number one hidden weapon to get the status gold medal. Yihu came to the martial arts field of the number one village in the world. In order to be lively and angry, Gong Gong, who had won the title of the number one illusionist, made a joke with the number one warrior Qin Yat. After that, there was a duel between Yihu and the current number one hidden weapon master. Humph, Junior, have you ever heard of my title of Invincible Dart? An old man wearing a grey robe with white hair and beard slowly walked up to Yihu with his hands behind his back and raised his head to the sky, looking like a lonely master. Yihu took 7 steps back and whispered. I don't know if the seniors have heard the saying that a gun is fast and accurate within 7 steps. The old man laid his head flat and was about to say something when he heard a loud noise like thunder. Yihu blew on the gun without gunpowder smoke and walked to the old man's side as if nothing had happened and snatched the gold medal from the opponent's corpse. Good. As expected of the newly promoted number one hidden weapon in the world. Shang Guanhaitang flew into the martial arts arena from the roof and looked at Yihu with admiration. The previous attack would have killed her on the spot if she was unprepared. Shang Guanhaitang decided to check the other party's details and recommend him to Yihu if there was no problem. Father, let's see if I can become the number one yellow character. Yihu nodded towards the other party as a response to the other party's previous praise. Seeing Shang Guanhaitang taking the number one gentleman away, Yihu immediately understood that the plot had begun. In order to use this gold medal to eat and drink for nothing in all the businesses of Wanzhenqian. Borrowing money all the time is not a thing. White whoring is the most delicious. Yihu smiled and greeted the people who came up to build relationships, and then went to the place where the old man was sitting, took a sip of the new bowl and chopsticks handed over by the maid. Tea on the table. By the way, have you heard? The skinny man next to Yehu glanced at everyone with obscene eyes, and then said softly, Xianba of the Tiangxiawai was promoted to Grand Master a month ago. Pfft! Yehu spit out all the tea he just drank, looked at the eyes of everyone and said apologetically, I'm sorry everyone, the news is really shocking, and I hope you will be more understanding. The few people at the table smiled and waved their hands to express that they don't mind. Their titles are all superficial, unlike Yehu who has real kung fu. Chapter 54 The World Meeting. Thank you all, Hai Han, if you find me Yehu useful in the future, please contact me. Yehu patted his chest and made a heroic look. Even if the other party really has something important, he has to find him. The thin man made the atmosphere so harmonious and continued. It is said that this male gang leader once studied with the old man Sanju and learned the other's 3 secrets. If I have the qualifications to practice martial arts, I must go to the world and give it a try, and maybe I can become the leader of the hall. Dang dang! Yehu rolled his eyes and picked up the dishes on the table that no one dared to eat with his chopsticks. Duan Lang thought the same way, but Xiong Ba directly manipulated the appointment of disciples in secret, so betting on dogs is not a house. Betting on Xiong Ba's character is better than betting on entering Ling Yun cave to find him. The probability of blood Bodhi. After eating and drinking, Yehu returned to his exclusive room in the villa. Although there was another stormy plot, there was no pressure on him. Unless he met a strong man who could destroy stars with one blow, no one could break his defense. Early the next morning, Yehu left the number 1 village in the world and took a horse with him to prepare for his journey in the world. To suit the occasion, he went to Wan San Chien Kai's clothing store and went whoring and dressed in white. After leaving the city, Yehu gently pinched the horse's belly and the surrounding scene quickly reversed. There was no destination for this trip and everything was left to chance. Half an hour later, he looked down at the dusty white clothes and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. He was just posing on the horse and forgot to use his phone. Mental power isolates external objects. Yehu used his mental power to bounce away the dust on his body. He looked up and looked at the 3 people 10 meters away with a trace of doubt on their faces. Seeing Yehu's action of using his internal force to bounce away the dust, Niuda immediately understood that he had met an expert today and swallowed it. In the previous opening remarks, he used his body to cover the ring-shouldered sword in his hand. Who are you? Yehu had a vague guess in his heart that Niu Dagong wanted to speak, so Niu Er who was beside him shouted loudly, Humph! I planted this tree on this mountain because I wanted to leave my dog's life behind. The corner of Yehu's mouth twitched slightly as he looked at the 3 brothers who came out to rob without even reciting their words well. With a flick of his right hand, the M1911 appeared in his hand. After 3 gunshots, he rode his horse past the 3 corpses and headed into the distance. A month later, Yehu rode a steed into the forest path with a sullen face. Without a map, he spent most of his time camping. Occasionally, he was lucky enough to meet a village or 2. The gold medal was useless if it wasn't for the wild game on the road. If it had been, he would have eaten his mount long ago. Heroes, please give Fu Wei escort a face. A well-built bodyguard walked to the front of the line and saluted the robber facing him with his fists clasped and showed the name of the bodyguard. The leader of the robber said disdainfully, If I used to be afraid of the 3-pointer of your Fu Wei bodyguard, but now no one knows you. The head of the bodyguard has offended the Qing Cheng faction, you must keep the convoy or die. The bodyguard's heart sank and he realized that this matter could not be resolved. He pulled out the long knife at his waist and said in a low voice, Then don't blame me for being ruthless. After speaking, he led a charge with more than 20 bodyguards. Everyone in the convoy looked at the huge team of bodyguards and felt relieved that things were stable. The bandit leader raised his right hand and the team parted to reveal the archers behind him. After a shower of arrows, the leading bodyguard was directly shot into a hedgehog and died tragically on the spot. Damn it! These bandits use such despicable methods. A wealthy businessman withdrew his head back into the carriage, took some gold and silver, jumped out of the carriage and rushed to the nearby woods, and some bright-minded people followed suit and ran to the woods. A woman in shabby clothes was just about to rush into the woods, but was forced back by the robbers who came to surround and intercept them. Faced with these people who dared to escape, the robbers slashed from the woods all the way to the convoy without batting an eye. Yehu drove his horse to the place where the sound of fighting came from, and was going to ask someone for directions. Those who can walk out these days have their own familiar routes, which is much better than those villagers who don't know the way after 10 miles out of the village. Stop! Yihu yelled, held the AK-47 and shot for a while. The bandit leader looked down at the blood hole in his chest, raised his hand tremblingly, pointed at Yihu and cursed in a low voice, "You, shameless! My lord, times have changed." Yihu unloaded the empty magazine and looked at the bandit leader indifferently, then drove to the only survivor and heard the woman tremblingly say before he could ask a question. "Great, the little girl can't repay the hero's life-saving grace." Just when Yihu was about to refuse the other party's request for a body promise, the girl continued, "I can only repay the hero in the next life by being a cow, a horse, a grass knot, and a ring kindness." Yihu touched his face with his hand and thought to himself that he was rejected by ugly. Thinking of this month's life of eating bran and swallowing vegetables, Yihu resisted the thought of killing the other party suddenly, and was ready to kick the other party away when he arrived in the town. "Okay, get up. Do you know the way to the town?" I know. Zhang Yuan touched her face with a dusty hand without any trace, and Yihu, who was in a hurry to go to the town to prostitute thousands of people, didn't pay attention to the other person's appearance, so naturally he didn't see the familiar face airbangs. Yihu came to a carriage and used his mental strength to unload the carriage from the poor horse and said in a low voice, "Ride it to lead the way." Listening to Yihu's indifferent words, Zhang Yuan's body shuddered, remembering how the other party used a hidden weapon to kill people before, and cautiously came to the side of the horse, looking at the empty horse's back with a look of embarrassment on her face, just about to speak, when she heard a cold voice. The voice came from behind. "Did you kill all these people?" Hua Wuokui looked at Yihu indifferently. What he hated the most was this kind of beast who went around killing people because he thought he was great just after learning Kung Fu for a few years. Yihu turned his head to look at the man in white with a hint of shock in his eyes. The man's appearance and attire were in line with his dream of being a hero when he was young. Also dressed in white, he felt like a buyer's show meets a seller's show. This young man misunderstood. The convoy encountered robbers before, thanks to this heroic little girl who survived. Zhang Yuan jogged 2 steps and came to Hua Wuokui's side, lowering her head and looking at her toes shyly. Yihu felt that the woman's path was narrow and asked the other young master to call her a hero. "Doesn't he, the jade-faced little white dragon, have no face? Feel sorry." Hua Wuokui bowed to Yihu with his fists in his arms, and his voice was very cold. Yihu snorted coldly and urged, "Hurry up and lead the way." Zhang Yuan was awakened by the cold snort, her body trembled and she subconsciously leaned towards Hua Wuokui. Yihu gritted his teeth and felt offended. Why should the same people be treated so differently? Can you do whatever you want just because you are handsome? 5 minutes later, Hua Wuokui drove a carriage on the official road. Zhang Yuan washed her face with water, put on the clothes she found in the carriage, opened the curtain, and chirped beside Hua Wuokui like a little oriole. "What's your name?" Looking at the airbangs on the other person's forehead, Yihu frowned slightly and his tone became a little more serious. Hua Wuokui, who was driving, turned his head and looked at Yihu and whispered. "In the Ziyahua Palace, there are no shortage of flowers. Little girl Zhang Yuan, the young master condescends to drive for me. Yuan is willing to be a slave and a maidservant to repay the young master's great kindness." Zhang Yuan looked at Hua Wuokui with an affectionate face. At the moment, all she wanted in her mind was to be with him, and finding a father was no longer important. As long as she could follow Hua Wuokui, she felt that she could be home anywhere. As for the humanoid creatures on horseback, she has automatically filtered them out. Chapter 55 Zhang Yuan. "Girl, please respect yourself." Hua Wuokui calmly moved his position to avoid the opponent's outstretched hand. Yihu, who was riding a horse beside him, cursed in his heart that film and television dramas are harmful to people. He promised that Zhang Yuan would fall in love with Hua Wuokui because she was saved by a hero. This was just out of sheer lust. He used an AK-47 to kill Zhang Yuan from all directions and then sent him away after repaying him in the next life. Hua Wuokui rushed to the car and Zhang Yuan wanted to be a slave. Yihu felt that he had broken his guard. His uncle and aunt couldn't bear it. He glanced sideways at the tender Zhang Yuan and cursed secretly, "You are a licking dog. You deserve to be beaten to death by Hua Wuokui." His favorable impression of Zhang Yuan in his memory dropped to negative. A woman with such an appearance should be beaten to death by Hua Wuokui. Yihu decided to go and watch the excitement. 5 days later, the 3 of them came to a town. Yihu quickly bowed his hands towards Hua Wuokui and said in a deep voice, "Brother Hua, let's just say goodbye." After saying that, he turned around and ran to this wretched place. He didn't want to stay for a moment. After entering the town, Yihu went straight to the restaurant run by Wan Sanqian, showed off his identity medal, and started eating and drinking. After staying there for 7 days, the horse's thin figure became round again. Yihu, who was eating and drinking in a restaurant that day, suddenly heard the sound of gongs and drums. He turned his head and looked out the window and saw a team walking into the town. Listening to the crowd's comments, he understood that it was Shu. The concubine went back to Mirong's house to visit relatives. Just when Yihu was about to look away, he suddenly saw Zhang Yuan on the opposite street. After thinking for a while, he asked the waiter to call him up. Zhang Yuan lowered her head and followed the waiter. She remembered what the other party had just said, that the young man in white thought he was a flower. Wu Kui called himself up. Hero. Seeing the flash of disappointment in Zhang Yuan's eyes, Yihu's mouth twitched slightly, but in order to speed up the plot, he suppressed the unhappiness in his heart and whispered, I need you to do something for me. Hero, I'm willing to do my best, even if I tell you, the little girl. Zhang Yuan leaned over and bowed, sighing in her heart that she was unlucky. Apart from her beauty, what else could she have to attract him? Zhang Yuan began to think about how to kill Yihu when he reached the top. Other side. I want to kill some people but I'm too lazy to do it myself, so I'm asking for your help. Hearing Yihu's plain voice, Zhang Yuan's face showed a look of embarrassment and whispered, it's hard for a little girl to take on a big responsibility without the strength to tie a chicken. Eat first, I'll teach you the techniques later. Yihu pointed at the food on the table. Zhang Yuan slowly came to sit across from Yihu and sat down, looking at the food on the table and swallowing. She was fascinated by the flowers. After Wu Kei was sent back to Zhang Mansion, he did not get the family affection he imagined. Instead, he was targeted everywhere. Zhang Yuan was a little touched in her heart, but that was it. She deeply understood the truth that only if you are valuable, others would look up to you. Yihu's heart beat wildly when he saw Zhang Yuan raising her head with spring in her eyes. It seemed like the smile is not a smile, the arrogant air bangs are the shadow of my childhood if I change my clothes again. After eating, Yihu followed Zhang Yuan into the Zhang mansion through the back door, and a servant came to Zhang Yuan and said proudly. Have you bought what madam asked you to buy? Who is this person? Noisy. Yihu snorted coldly, took out his M1911 and shot a headshot. Zhang Yuan's body trembled and she couldn't believe that Yihu had killed someone like this, but the next second she felt a sense of pleasure of revenge, and the sound of the gunshot shocked her. The guards in the mansion. Zhang Bihe and his escort blocked the two people in the corridor and yelled at Yihu, who are you? Hand over the Lyran divine dice. Or die. Yihu didn't like this kind of ungrateful person very much. When Zhang Bihe heard this, his pupils shrank slightly and he backed away while shouting, give them all. If you kill him, you will be rewarded heavily. Yihu raised the M1911 and started firing. Zhang Yuan pursed her lips to say something, but she swallowed the words back. In the end, these people were not worth offending Yihu. Dad, what's wrong with you? A soft voice came from the front. Zhang Yuan trembled and recognized that the other party was her cheap sister. Remembering that the other party's usual care for her had not yet darkened, she quickly spoke. Sir, please don't hurt her. Yihu turned his head and looked at the stubborn look in Zhang Yuan's eyes. He recalled the scene in the original book where she brutally murdered Zhang Yufeng and shook his head slightly. Sure enough, bad guys are not born. Sometimes the environment they live in can completely change a person. Yihu remembered how he had just arrived at Marvel. He sighed and lowered the muzzle of his gun. The two of them crossed the moon cave door and came to the front yard. Zhang Yufeng held a long sword and stared at Yihu sharply and yelled. How dare Xiao Feng Xiao come to my Zhang family to act wild? Why don't you let go of my sister quickly? Zhang Yuan's heart warmed, and just as she was about to explain, she saw her sister fly upside down and slam it on the wall. Zhang Bihe, who was waiting for her daughter to unleash her powers to deal with the thief, turned black and stood there dumbfounded. This is how he taught his daughter? Although he cursed Nanhai Sheni in his heart for misleading his children, this did not stop Zhang Bihe from kneeling down and begging for mercy. Hero, don't kill me. I'm willing to offer you the Lyran divine dice. Zhang Yuan felt a little disappointed when she saw her father who kept kowtowing and didn't look at Zhang Yufeng. Yihu put the gun back into his backpack and said in a cold voice, lead the way. Sir, this is the Lyran divine dice. A few minutes later, Zhang Bihe took out a wooden box with a smirk. Yehu looked at the thing in front of him that looked like a Rubik's Cube and curled his lips in disdain. My heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. Yehu turned around and left, then opened the Lyran Divine Dice and used his watch to scan the content inside and translate it. Zhang Yuan, who was hesitating whether to leave, suddenly heard Yehu's voice in her mind. After a few seconds, the corners of Zhang Yuan's mouth rose slightly. It's you who brought the bad guys home. Seeing the smile on Zhang Yuan's lips, Zhang Bihe felt angry and raised his hand to slap the opponent to the ground. Zhang Yufeng, who had just come out of the ruins, could not help but feel angry. Not feeling the pain in his body, he reached out and took his father's hand and whispered. My sister was also coerced. Father, please don't be angry. Seeing Zhang Yufeng wink at her, Zhang Yuan immediately knelt on the ground and sobbed, that man only said he was daddy's friend. I brought him back without doubting his presence and asked daddy to atone for his sins. Zhang Bihe struggled and couldn't break free, so he roared loudly, I don't have a daughter like you. Get out of here. Listening to her father's heartless words, Zhang Yuan felt as if a bucket of cold water was being poured down from her head to her soles. The thought of sharing her magical skills disappeared. She tightly grasped the corners of her clothes with both hands and stood up without saying a word and returned to her shabby room. Early the next morning, Mrs. Lu used what happened last night to threaten Zhang Yuan to either break her mother's memorial tablet or get out of Zhang Mansion and fend for herself. Zhang Yuan stood up silently and walked firmly towards the back door holding the tablet. Watching Zhang Yu leave, Ms. Lu raised the corners of her mouth slightly and winked at the guard on the side. Chapter 56 Yan Ying. Yehu killed the two guards in front of Zhang Yuan and whispered, if you want to gain a foothold in this world, you must have strength and background. Zhang Yuan slowly raised her head after hearing this. Seeing the hatred in the other person's eyes, Yehu nodded with satisfaction. The other person's current appearance only resembled Zhang Huang. Men would only affect Zhang Huang's dominance. Yehu bought a house for Zhang Yuan with the borrowed money and left some money before leaving the town to go to Lingyun Cave to see the legendary fire unicorn. Zhang Yuan looked at Yehu's leaving figure with a flash in her eyes. Grateful, he waited until the other party disappeared from sight before closing the door and returning to the house to start practicing grafting. Yehu followed the map and headed in the direction of Lingyun Cave. A month later, Yehu led the horse and walked in the woods. A strong voice came from the top of the giant Buddha not far away. A vain woman like you doesn't deserve to be on an equal footing with me. I'll give this woman back to you when I'm done with it. Yehu's eyes lit up. He didn't expect to be able to watch the battle on the spot, he couldn't attract the attention of the two of them because he had no internal strength, and listening to King Nai calling his beloved wife's name piercingly, Yehu couldn't help thinking kudos to this strong man. Hungba! I will take your life today to avenge Yan Ying. With a roar, King Nai leaped up from the Buddha's eyelids, pulled out the blood-drinking knife and slashed at Xianba. Total annihilation. I saw a 40-meter-long giant knife cut open the river and cut off the weapon in Xianba's hand. Xianba laughed and threw away the broken sword, channeling his internal force to his hands to form a transparent ball and shouted in a low voice. 3 points of return to vitality. Nai Rinwang subconsciously swung his knife to cut the ball into 2 pieces, but the split water drops hit his chest and flew upside down and landed at the entrance of Lingyun Grotto, spitting out a mouthful of blood. Just as Xianba was about to kill Nai Rinwang, he gained a wave of popularity at that moment. The fire unicorn, which felt the breath of the blood-drinking knife in Lingyun Cave, rushed out and bit King Nai Ren, turned around and ran towards the cave. Dad! Dad! Nai Feng yelled and chased into the cave. Hearing his son's cries, Nai Rinwang broke out in cold sweat. Afraid that the fire unicorn would kill his only son, he quickly summoned his inner strength to knock Nai Feng away and shouted loudly. Fenger, go away! Don't avenge me! Xianba stood at the entrance of the cave with a serious expression on his face. The aura that Huo Kailan leaked just now at least had the peak of a master, and the physical strength brought by his blood was far from what he could match as a new master. Glancing at the 2 children lying on the ground, hesitating for a second, he decided to bring them back to Tianxiawai. Yehu looked away, walked to the side of the horse, took off the saddle on each other and said in a low voice. Go, you are free. Be careful not to be caught again in the future. The steed sticks out its tongue and licks Yehu's palm, turns around and walks away quickly. Yehu comes to the top of the Buddha and jumps, carrying himself to Lingyun Grotto with mental power, and uses his mental power to explore the movement inside. 1 day later, Yehu managed to find the blood Bodhi. After taking 1 pill, he felt like eating a seedless cherry and had no reaction. After taking 3 pills in a row, he put the extra blood body into his backpack. After looking at the crisscross passages in front of him and thinking about it, he turned and left the cave. Yihu walked in the woods and regretted letting go of the horse. A horse came out, and Yihu felt a little moved when he saw the familiar appearance. Animals are sometimes more loyal than humans. Just when he opened his arms to embrace the horse, a figure jumped out from the woods and shouted, "Huna man, stop the horse quickly, and the sword-greedy man will reward you." Yihu raised his eyebrows and stretched out his hand to comfort the horse and said in a calm tone, "Are you Jian Tan?" "It's my uncle." Standing on a tree branch, Jian Tan took out a copper coin from his pocket and said in a frivolous tone, "This copper coin is my reward for you." "Wait a minute." Yihu raised his hand to stop the opponent from ejecting the copper plate and said softly, "I want to make a bet with you." "What do you want to bet on?" Jian Tan raised his eyebrows and became a little interested, ready to shoot the opponent with copper coins after he got tired of playing. Yihu took out the M1911 and said in a deep voice, "Bet on whether there are bullets in my gun." "Just bet a copper coin." After speaking, he raised his gun and heard a sound like thunder. Jian Tan subconsciously dodged his head, and then there was a burning pain on his right cheek. "I didn't expect that I made a mistake. You turned out to be a practicing master." A flash of surprise flashed in Yihu's eyes. This was the first time he saw someone who could dodge bullets. Thinking of the Dart Invincible who had fought against him before, he suddenly felt that the number 1 village in the world was a little watery. Seeing that Yihu didn't answer his words, Jian Tan was a little unsure of the opponent's strength. After hesitating for a second, he whispered, "The mountains remain green and the water flows forever. The humiliation you suffer today will be repaid twice as much in the future." Yihu pouted disdainfully at Yun Zhongyi who ran away after the harsh words, put away his M1911 and took out the RPG to aim at the figure who was leaving quickly. After a loud noise, Yun Zhongyi turned into a puddle of mud. "Hitui, how can it be so easy to just run away after pretending to beep?" Yihu spat on the ground in disdain, got on his horse and was about to go to a nearby town to get a set of saddles. He glanced at the unchanged progress bar on the panel and cursed the sword in his heart because he was greedy for garbage. 3 days later, Yihu came to the town to fit the horse. He took the other person on a saddle and walked leisurely down the street, looking for Wan Sanqian's shop. After some searching, I finally found a restaurant worth 13,000 yuan at the end of the street. I showed my gold medal and was taken to a seat by the window on the 2nd floor by the shopkeeper. The people around looked sideways and saw the gold medal around Yihu's waist. There was a clear look on his face. The man from the number 1 village in the world was indeed worthy of being welcomed personally by the shopkeeper. "Have any of you heard about it?" A man with a wretched appearance looked at the crowd and said conspiratorially, "A few days ago, the princess of Izumo Kingdom came to Beijing to meet the saint. The Queen Mother liked her very much and gave her the title in person. The princess of Izumo Kingdom is also a great person. Beauty." The wretched man became more and more enthusiastic as he talked, and the topic gradually shifted away. Several strong men around showed wretched smiles on their faces. Yihu, who was on the side, remembered the titles bestowed by right and wrong in the plot. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly. At this moment, a man dressed as a knight said disdainfully, "If we want to talk about the big event, it has to be the decisive battle between Baiun City Lord Yegukan and Ximenchuixu on the top of the Forbidden City on September 15th. When Yihu heard this, he immediately became interested. Words such as the top of the Forbidden City on a full moon night and the flying immortals coming from the west with a sword flashed through his mind. Just thinking about this scene makes people excited. Yihu decided to set off early tomorrow morning and try to get to the capital within a month to watch the Century War. At the same time, Lu Xi brought the 13th prince to Murong's house, hoping to pressure Murong Wudi to capture the little fairy back to practice martial arts. Murong Wudi asked Xiao Yuer to take Murong Xian to the palace to find concubine Shu, and then came alone. The front room handles 2 people. Chapter 57. The incident happened. After a verbal exchange, Murong Wudi used the crazy dragon palm to hit Lu Xi, but was restrained by the opponent's suction method. Just when Lu Xi was about to absorb all the opponent's internal energy, the little fairy arrived in time to save his father. Looking at the beautiful woman on the eaves, 13th prince instantly turned into a licking dog and ordered Lu Xi to let go of his father-in-law. Looking at 13th prince's lecherous and hungry look, the little fairy frowned slightly, but for the sake of her father, she still agreed to let him go. "Go to the royal garden to play." Lu Xi absorbed half of Murong Wudi's internal energy and threw him to the ground. He bowed his eyebrows and saluted the 13th prince with a murderous intent in his eyes. 3 days later, the little fairy came to the palace in the capital to find concubine Shu and took away the 13th prince's body. Things are said. Concubine Shu frowned slightly when she heard her father was insulted. However, the 13th prince was deeply loved by the emperor, and even she did not dare to provoke her. After comforting her sister for a few words, concubine Shu let the little fairy live in the palace. With her, the 13th prince did not dare to break in. Come in. After learning about this, the 13th prince scolded Lu Xi for his incompetence and threw the teacup in his hand on his opponent's head. Lu Xi held the tea in his hands and said with a flattering face, "Your Highness, don't worry, I have arranged everything. Concubine Shu will go there tonight. Accompany your Majesty, when the time comes." Lu Xi's face showed a look of you-know-what, which immediately made the 13th prince think wildly. As long as concubine Shu was not there, he had nothing to fear. At night, concubine Shu was dressing up in the main hall and waiting for the emperor's visit. The little fairy was practicing swordsmanship in the side hall. Missing Xiao Yuer in his heart, the eunuch on the side saw that the little fairy had not noticed that he quickly poured a packet of powder into the teacup. 10 minutes later, the little fairy put away the sword and came to the wooden table. Picked up the teacup and drank it all in one gulp. After a few breaths, a feeling of dizziness came over her. The 13th prince, who was hiding outside the palace, took the opportunity to rush in and hug the little fairy from behind. With his thin waist, he decided to test his shooting skills with his father tonight. Ah, sneeze! The emperor who was walking toward concubine Shu sneezed. The eunuch on the side quickly stepped forward and asked in a low voice. The emperor shook his head and said that he was fine. Thinking of concubine Shu's enchanting body, he felt as uncomfortable as a cat scratching his heart and subconsciously accelerated his pace. "Let me go," the little fairy roared and broke free from the shackles of the 13th prince. She hit him in the heart with her crazy dragon palm and turned around and ran towards the main hall. The 13th prince staggered back 2 steps and fell to the ground and shouted, "Help, hurry and help." Lu Xi, who was waiting outside the palace, deliberately let the little fairy go and then quickly came to the side of the 13th prince. He opened his clothes and looked at the palm prints on his chest. He found that Murongxian only used 3 levels of skills and nothing serious happened. Lu Xi, an inexplicable look flashed in Xi's eyes, and he used his inner strength to point a finger at the 13th prince's chest. The 13th prince, who was waiting for Lu Xi to report the situation, had his eyes widened and spat out a mouthful of blood and slowly fell to the ground. Lu Xi had a sad look on his face and ran quickly to complain to the emperor outside the palace. The little fairy came to the main hall. Sobbing, she told concubine Shu what had just happened. Knowing that her sister had only used 3 layers of internal energy, concubine Shu felt relieved, but then she felt a sense of unknown anger. The other party dared to break into her palace in an attempt to humiliate her sister. She couldn't swallow this breath. If the tiger didn't show its power, she would really treat her as sick cat. Murong Shu planned to wait for the emperor to come and file an imperial edict to punish the 13th prince severely. "Your Majesty is in trouble." Murongxian used the mad dragon palm to beat the 13th prince to death. Lu Xi stumbled to the emperor and knelt down on one knee. Just as he was imagining killing everyone, the emperor's body trembled. Cao Zhengchun beside him quickly stretched out his hand to support him and whispered, "Grant me a protective dragon body. Quick! Take me to have a look." The emperor took a deep breath and stared at Lu Xi sharply. 5 minutes later, the accompanying physician put down his hand and shook his head. The emperor took a deep breath and said sternly, "Zhengchun, you stay here to bury 13. Lu Xi will go with me to arrest Murongxian." "Yes. Your Majesty." Cao Zhengchun bowed and looked deeply at Lu Xi who was leaving. The imperial doctor might not be able to see the death of the 13th prince, but he was well informed and could tell at a glance that the palm prints on the other person's chest were not fatal. The 13th prince was just one of the emperor's heirs, and his life and death had nothing to do with him. Concubine Shu and the little fairy stood outside the palace, waiting for the emperor. The cold wind could not make the 2 of them feel uncomfortable. "Go in and talk. You all should stand down." The emperor looked at the 2 people with an indifferent expression, and there was no tenderness in the past. The moment they passed each other, concubine Shu felt that things might have changed. Lu Xi stared at the two of them greedily with a trace of ridicule at the corner of his mouth. He would be able to do it once tonight is over. Capture the two of them and then practice the dharma of absorbing energy to the highest level during the 7 stars continuity. At that time, Cao Zhengchun and Zhu Mingyu will all have to make way for him. Greetings to your majesty. Concubine Shu pulled the little fairy and saluted the emperor. Just as she was about to show off her acting skills, she heard the other party's indifferent voice. The 13th prince died under the palm of the mad dragon. The emperor looked at the little fairy with indifferent eyes. Concubine Shu stepped forward and protected her sister behind her and said anxiously, Your Majesty, the 13th prince teased Sienna and wanted to destroy her innocence. That's enough. The emperor roared and interrupted Concubine Shu. He looked at the beauty's beautiful face and hesitated for a while before saying softly, I can hand over Murongxian without involving the Murong family. The little fairy's body trembled and she subconsciously grabbed the corner of her sister's clothes and whispered, Impossible. I can't beat him to death with only 3 levels of skills. Murong Shu felt her heart hurt when she heard her sister's frightened voice. She quickly knelt on the ground and kowtowed to the emperor and shouted loudly, Please forgive me, Your Majesty, let my sister go. The emperor looked at Concubine Shu, who had never asked for anything from him, with a flash of wavering in his eyes, but when he remembered the death of the 13th prince, his eyes became firm again. Seeing this, Lu Xi on the side quickly stepped forward and reached out to grab the little fairy. Murong Shu stood up suddenly and hit Lu Xi with a palm. She protected her sister behind her. She looked at the emperor and said solemnly, No one can hurt my sister. After saying that, she rushed out of the palace with Murongxian and fled all the way over the eaves and walls to the entrance of the palace. Lu Xi did not pursue the two of them. Murong Shu still had some status in the emperor's heart. If he wanted to practice with the opponent, he had to completely disappoint the emperor. Lu Xi looked at the emperor whose expression kept changing and walked forward quickly and whispered. Your Majesty, Concubine Shu has absolutely no scruples in doing this, but for your dignity, I think it would be better to confiscate the Murong family and exterminate them. To show your Majesty what Ai Ching said is true, let me leave this matter to you. A smile appeared on the corner of the emperor's mouth. Lu Xi knelt down to accept the order and his heart was filled with joy. Cao Zhengchun, who had just stepped across the threshold, shook his head slightly when he saw this. His Majesty's attention to the other party's previous thoughts of wooing him instantly faded away. The moment they passed each other, Lu Xi showed a hint of ridicule to the other party, preparing to find an opportunity to suck out the opponent's internal energy after completing the magic skill. Cao Zhengchun ignored Lu Xi, he would not argue with a dead man, and slowly came to the emperor's side and stood watching. Looking at the mind from nose to nose is like a sculpture. After he masters the art of absorbing energy, let him challenge Zhu Yu, Even a dog-like thing deserves to express his opinion. After Shizhen dies, some people will be needed to protect him below. Yes, Your Majesty. Cao Zhengchun bowed slightly and sounded very respectful. Chapter 58 The Murong family is wiped out. Murong Shu and her sister escaped from the palace and came to a nunnery where they were taken in by Master Wu Ai, the host. Murong Shu wrote 2 letters of request and had them delivered to the hands of Nanhai Sheni and Murong Wudi. After the disaster, the two people looked at each other and saw fear in each other's eyes. 2 days later, Lu Xi led people to Murong's house and read out the imperial edict, ordering people to capture Murong Wudi and his son, and took them to the capital for a parade. Sent to jail. Master Wu Ai brought a nun to Lu Xi's place to tell the truth and received a reward of 1,000 taels of gold. Murong Shu and the two were not her friends. Nanhai Sheni betrayed them. Wu Ai felt no guilt at all. Lu Xi handed over a packet of medicinal powder. He handed it to Wuan and agreed to come and arrest him in time. Seeing the 2 nuns leaving Lu Xi's place, Xiao Yu immediately thought of Murong Shu's master Nanhai Sheni and decided to follow them to find out the situation. Sure enough, they saw the little fairy in the nunnery. The people took it down, and Lu Xi, who came in the morning, saw the nun in the courtyard, his face darkened and ordered everyone to be killed. 7 days later, the Nanhai Sheni rushed to the capital and decided to go to the robbery scene with the 3 people to rescue people. Lu Xi came to the cell where Murong Wudi was imprisoned and asked someone to make a mask for the killer Chongqian to wear. On the day of the execution, Shen Ni dropped from the sky with a sword and aimed directly at Lu Xi. Xiao Yu rushed to the execution ground and rescued Murong Wudi and the others. Lu Xi used his right hand to use his inner strength to slap Shen Ni's sword blade away. His left hand turned into a palm and hit Shen Ni in the chest. Shen Ni, who had no time to change his moves, hurriedly used his internal strength to strike a palm blow with Lu Xi, using the opponent's strength to distance himself. After a fight, the two Murong Zheng brothers died under the rioters. Murong Shu supported her father and rushed to the entrance of the execution ground. Xiao Yuer blocked the arrows behind a few people. Shen Yi jumped behind everyone and struck out with the palm of his right hand to block the entrance. The officers and soldiers at the exit were knocked away and everyone ran wildly. Murong Shu was accidentally shot in both legs. The moment she fell to the ground, she pushed Murong Wudi towards Xiao Yuer and shouted, "Leave me alone, take them away quickly." Shen Ni glanced at Lu Xi who was chasing behind him and resisted the urge to turn back and led everyone to continue running. When Lu Xi saw Murong Shu lagging behind, he quickly raised his hand to stop everyone who wanted to shoot arrows and asked his henchmen to escort her back to the prison. Everyone fled all the way and finally got rid of Lu Xi's pursuit. Shen Yi suddenly fell to his knees and spit out a mouthful of blood. He had suffered serious internal injuries when he and Lu Xi were sparring. Plus, after running all the way, he was relaxed and could no longer suppress the internal injuries. "Don't worry, Wudi. This minor injury will heal in a few days." Shen Yi raised his hand to stop Murong Wudi, who was trying to help him. He looked at the other person's pale face and hesitated for a second before deciding to take his pulse. The moment he caught the pulse, Shen Yi's expression changed. Just as he was about to let go and retreat, Chang Tian grabbed his pulse with his backhand and hit his heart with a palm. A sound of cracking bones resounded in the silent forest. Nanhai Shen Yi forcibly raised his hand and stopped Chang Tian. "Let everyone leave." Half a month later, Yihu rode outside the capital and suddenly the sky darkened. Yihu took the opportunity and rode into the city. A few seconds later, the sky became clear again. Knowing the plot well, he understood that Lu Xi had absorbed the power of 5 Yang and 2 Yin. 3 days later, Zhang Yuan, who received Yihu's message, came to a house. The only difference between the person's appearance and the memory was that he was wearing a dragon robe. Yihu pondered for a moment and then whispered, "I will take him with me after the battle at the top of the Forbidden City is over. You go and improve your strength." Seeing the fleeting excitement on Zhang Yuan's face, she said unhurriedly, "I don't care what you think in your heart, but what I ordered must be completed." "Yes, sir." Zhang Yuan bowed slightly and made a full gesture. Yihu nodded and turned around to leave, preparing to go to the restaurant run by Wan Sanqian to slaughter the local tycoons. 7 days later, a large number of Jianghe people appeared in the capital, and the court asked Halong Villa to maintain the interior of the Forbidden City. Order. Lu Xi looked at Zhu Yuyu who received the order to thank him in the main hall, and a trace of greed flashed in his eyes. If he could drain the opponent's inner strength, he would become the best in the world. After the court was over, Zhu Yuyu glanced at Lu Xi casually and raised the corners of his mouth slightly. The so-called 7 stars Lianzi was written in the secret book to fool people. He was looking forward to Lu Xi coming to trouble him so that his skills could be further improved. After returning to Halong Villa, Zhu Yuvong dispatched the task. After receiving the notice, Yihu frowned and felt a little unhappy, but he had gathered a lot of wool from eating and drinking these days and could not refuse at the moment. Half an hour later, he came to the area he was responsible for and shot a man who used Qing Kong Fu to turn over. The jocks who climbed the wall shot him dead, then took out a set of tables and chairs from his backpack and sat down behind the wall to drink tea. Anyone who wanted to enter through this wall was shot dead by him. After an hour, no one came to climb the wall. Everyone just wanted to have an eye addiction and did not want to lose their lives. Lu Ziaji, do you think this place is really as powerful as they say? Sikong Zaixing turned his head to look at his friend with an eager expression on his face. Lu Xiaofeng shook his head and whispered, anyone who can be recognized by people in the world is not an ordinary person. Maybe this person is one of the 4 secret agents of Halong Villa. 1. We are just here to watch the battle, there is no need to provoke him. Sikong Zaixing snorted disdainfully and said. There is no place in this world that I, Sikong Zaixing, dare not go to. After saying that, he flew towards the palace wall. Yihu, who was resting, heard the noise and raised his hand to shoot, but this time he didn't hear the familiar sound of being shot. When he looked up, he saw a man standing on the grass looking at him with unruly eyes. Are you the guard here? It seems that you are not very good either. Sikong Zaixing raised his head and curled his lips in disdain. His Qinggong skills were unscrupulous under the Grand Master. He didn't think that a gatekeeper could speak with the cultivation level of a Grand Master, so he naturally became arrogant and domineering. Just when Yi Hu was about to take out the RPG and teach him how to behave, another figure jumped up from behind the wall, moved in the air a few times, and then landed on the lawn. Yi Hu looked at the handsome face of the other person and the faint smile on his lips. It was immediately clear that this man was a scumbag. My good friend is not smart enough to speak, please forgive me. Lu Xiaofeng clasped his hands and saluted Yi Hu and said in a calm tone, I'm Lu Xiaofeng, if you don't give up, you can go to Baohenia City with me to watch the decisive battle. When he heard the other party announcing his family name, Yi Hu raised his eyebrows and looked at it carefully before saying in a low voice, Are you Lu Xiaofeng with 4 eyebrows? That's right. The warm smile on Lu Xiaofeng's lips could hardly make people feel bored. Yi Hu nodded and said softly, Okay, for your sake, you two can go there. After saying that, he turned to look at Sikong Zaixing and said in a deep voice, You're lucky this time, otherwise my legs will be broken. What are you talking about? Sikong Zaixing got angry instantly and broke away from Lu Xiaofeng's hand and rushed towards Yi Hu, ready to teach the big man a lesson. Yi Hu took out a Gatling gun and fired at Sikong Zaixing, the muzzle of the gun rising. A burst of orange flames poured out bullets crazily. Facing a hidden weapon with a rate of fire that was several times faster than before, Sikong Zaixing exploded with potential while moving left and right while closing the distance with Yi Hu. People who use hidden weapons like this are generally weak in close combat. He was confident that he could kill him within 10 moves. Other side. Chapter 59 Times have changed. Yi Hu's face gradually darkened as he watched Sikong Zaixing dodging bullets like a butterfly in a flower. He stepped forward with both feet and flew backwards 10 meters. He put away the Gatling gun in his hand, took out the RPG, put it on his shoulder and aimed at the fast-moving Sikong Zaixing pulled the trigger hard. The moment the rocket flew out, Sikong Zaixing felt a breath of death. Lu Xiaofeng's expression changed and he quickly rushed towards the rocket. He stretched out his right hand and firmly clamped the front part of the rocket with one finger while Yi Hu was stunned. Of bulges. Fuck. Coach, I'm reporting someone for cheating. Yi Hu's heart was beating wildly and he subconsciously raised his thumbs up with a look of admiration on his face. This wave of rockets in his hand really showed him off. Lu Xiaofeng held the rocket in his hand with admiration. Said. Brother, I admire the extraordinary power of this hidden weapon. I hope I can spare brother Sikong for a while because of my thin face. Yi Hu looked at Lu Xiaofeng carefully and said slowly, I never give anyone a third chance. Thank you. Lu Xiaofeng pulled Sikong Zaixing, who was about to speak again, and saluted Yi Hu with his fists, pulling him away quickly. Remembering the aura of death before, Sikong Zaixing didn't say anything more, and followed Lu Xiaofeng towards the palace. Go inside. Yi Hu didn't care about Lu Xiaofeng taking away his rocket. Why should the other party return what he caught with his own ability? Watching the two people who successfully broke into the palace wall and stayed around, the people in the world began to get ready to make a move. Everyone wanted to prove it. I am not weaker than others. Listening to the intensive gunfire from behind, Sikong Zaixing said disdainfully, what's so great about a guy who can only rely on concealed weapons? If we meet him in the wild, I'm 80% sure to beat him. Call him Grandpa. Okay. Just stop saying a few words. Lu Xiaofeng said angrily, looking at his friend who looked dissatisfied, I almost missed the opponent's last blow. It's better to provoke him less in the future. Hearing Lu Xiaofeng's words, Sikong Zaixing's eyes flashed with fear. He had just been so excited. If he had met Yi Hu in the wild, he would have disappeared from his sight within 3 breaths. Sikong's eye recalled the scene where Lu Xiaofeng risked his own life to save himself. Star quipped. Little chicken, if you were a woman, I would definitely marry you home and love you so much. Lu Xiaofeng trembled and said angrily, Gun, please stay away from me from now on. The two of them came to the top of the Forbidden City after quarreling and found that the place was already full of people, all of them were the older generation of powerful men who were famous in the martial arts world and some upstarts in the world. The court did not want to offend the so-called protectors of the entire world because of a trivial matter. Order only applies to those guys who have no strength and no background. An hour later, the sky darkened completely. A white figure lightly clicked on the palace wall and quickly rushed into the palace. Feeling the sword intent emanating from the opponent, Everyone immediately understood that the rightful owner had arrived. Ximenchuixue fell slowly like a feather. On the tower of the Forbidden City, holding a sword with both hands, he looked like he would not allow strangers to approach him. Yihu stood in the shadows and looked at the figure of Shensu in white clothes. He had an idea in his heart that the other person should wear white clothes. At this moment, a voice sounded from behind. "Brother Yi, why did you hide here secretly instead of guarding the city wall?" Yihu looked back and saw Shangguan Haitang staring at him with a smile on his face, followed by Duan Tianya and Gui Hai. When Yihu saw this, he immediately understood that the other party was joking with him, rolled his eyes and said angrily, "Aren't you the same? Here we go, if you miss a battle of this level, you will regret it for the rest of your life." Duan Tianya on the side nodded in agreement. He was also a master of swordsmanship, so he could naturally feel the gap between himself and Ximenchuixue. He would benefit a lot from watching such a strong battle. Gui Hai, who was standing behind Shangguan Haitang, looked at him with a sword. Staring at Yihu indifferently, like a beast that chooses people to devour. Yihu glanced at Haitang and then at Gui Hai Yidao and immediately understood that the other party was jealous. Shangguan Haitang smiled at him and Gui Hai Yidao became murderous. His intentions were smaller than his own. Just when Haitang was about to close the distance between the two sides, another figure quickly approached from a distance and landed steadily opposite Ximenchuixue. "Sorry, I'm late." "No, you came just in time." Ximenchuixue held the scabbard with his left hand and his eyes became extremely sharp. A sword intent shot straight into the sky. Yekuken's eyes lit up and then he shook his head. The other party's strength was not bad. In a few years, he would probably be on par with him, but now the two of them are still there is a small gap. If he goes all out, he is sure to kill the opponent with the flying immortal. Ximenchuixue raised the long sword in his hand and said in a cold voice, "This sword is the sharpest weapon in the world. The blade is 3 feet and 7 inches, and the net weight is 7 catties and 13 tails. What a sword!" Yekuken nodded slowly, raised the long sword in his hand and said in a deep voice, "This sword is made of cold iron, with a blade of 3 feet and 3 feet, and a net weight of 6 kilograms and 4 tails. What a sword!" Ximenchuixue nodded slightly and held the hilt of the sword with his right hand and began to accumulate sword power. Looking at the scene in front of him, Yihu whispered in a low voice, "On a full moon night from the top of the Forbidden City, a sword came from the west and a flying fairy from the sky." Good sentence. Shangguan Haitang's eyes lit up, she opened the folding fan in her hand, shook it in front of her chest, and savored a few words carefully. She couldn't help but sigh with an immersive feeling, Brother Yi's literary talent, Haitang admires it very much. Humph! A little trick. Gui Hai Yudao slowly held the handle of the knife, staring at Yihu with sharp eyes and said in a cold voice, "You dare to fight? Are you sick?" Yihu looked at Gui Hai Yudao with eyes that looked like he was mentally ill, and he couldn't even chat about anything. When Haitang threw herself into Duan Tianya's arms, "She didn't see you draw your sword, so why did you draw your sword and slash someone in just a few words? Isn't this bullying an honest person?" Gui Hai took a step forward with a knife and murderous intent surged through his body. Shangguan Haitang looked at the unmoved Yihu with a flash of light in his eyes. He closed the folding fan in his hand and stretched his arms to block Gui Hai's knife and whispered, "We are all our own people, so why hurt them? Be kind, Yida, this person is a martial arts idiot, let Haitang apologize to Brother Yi on his behalf." "It's okay, I'm the most generous person." Yihu smiled with a smile on his face and decided in his heart to wait for Zhang Yuan to drain Lu Xi's inner strength and let him suck Gui Hai to death. Feeling the warmth coming from his chest, Gui Hai Yudao's face softened slightly. He snorted coldly at Yihu, then restrained his murderous intent and stopped where he was, intending to feel the warmth more. Yihu looked at Gui Hai Yuda's appearance and felt very angry. He inexplicably remembered a scene, Tom holding the head of a boiling sheep, wearing a black tiger's cloak, carrying a double-faced turtle's shell and shouting loudly. "Holding the swallow! Swallow! How can I live without you?" Just thinking about this scene made his skin crawl. He decided to cure these people's dog-licking disease if they had the opportunity in the future. While a few people were talking, the two people on the tower began the first round of testing. Ximenchuixue's figure flashed in front of Yekuken. A white light flashed in his hand, and the sword intent surged straight into the sky. Only a few people saw his action of drawing the sword. Yekuken held the sword in his right hand and pushed Ximenchuixue hard. "Back away," he said with a serious face. "Nice swordsmanship." Chapter 60 The Top of the Forbidden City. Ximen Shuixu's eyes condensed and he rushed forward again with gentle steps. The sword skills in his hands became more and more powerful. Yekuken's eyes flashed and Ximen Shuixu moved left and right on the tower. The two sword lights became particularly bright against the night. Yihu stared at the two of them intently. Although he did not follow the martial arts route, he liked this kind of gorgeous swordsmanship with infinite murderous intent. The two of them had fought for 10 rounds and their momentum had reached its peak. One move determines the outcome. Good. As soon as the words fell, the two of them used their special skills at the same time. A fairy figure appeared behind Yekuken. Although the appearance was very attractive, people with advanced skills could feel the murderous intention contained in this move. Nothing appeared behind Ximen Shuixu. It's just that his eyes are colder and his sword is sharper. He loves swords and only trusts the 3-foot green edge in his hand. Two figures passed each other and stood on the tower. The next second, Yekuken's body swayed and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Just now he felt Ximen Shuixu's sword intent sublimated. At this time, he was already qualified to compete with himself. He both lamented the opponent's talent and regretted that he could not compete with Ximen Shuixu at this moment. Everyone looked at Yekuken's figure slowly falling to the ground with expressions of disbelief on their faces. Before that, they all thought that Yekuken would win. The experts who had bet heavily on the game secretly cursed that there was an inside story. Yihu shook his head and turned towards the exit, preparing to take Zhang Yuan to clear the copy and absorb Lu Xi's internal energy. Shang Guanhaitang took a deep look at Yihu's back. She had used all means before to find out that the other party was in the number 1 village in the world. What happened before was why Yihu was not allowed to serve as the number 1 secret agent. When passing by the city wall they were guarding before, the palace guards had already disposed of the body. Yihu knocked on the door and looked at the sleepy Zhang Yuan and whispered, "Let's go, I'll take you to Lu Xi to suck him dry." When Zhang Yuan heard this, she immediately felt sleepy. The two of them went all the way to Dongcheng and used their spiritual power to charm the guards. They arrived at Lu Zifang's door without any hindrance. Zhang Yuan's eyes flashed with a glint, and she had a general understanding of Yihu's power. "Yes, Xiaoizi." Lu Xi's voice came from inside. Yihu stepped forward and pushed open the door. A figure appeared in front of him and slapped his face with his right palm. However, this powerful and heavy palm hit him 50 times in front of Yihu. CM to stop. Lu Xi only felt that his 300 years of skill were as powerless in front of the opponent as a mayfly shaking a tree. Yihu increased the output of the space gem energy in his body, knocking Lu Xi 3 meters away and slamming him against the wall. "Ahem, who are you? Do you know how serious a crime it is to assassinate a court official? If you leave like this, I would like to pretend that nothing happened." Yihu's majestic internal power really frightened Lu Xi. He just secretly activated the power-absorbing method to counterattack the opponent but could not absorb anything. Yihu looked at Lu Xi who kept begging for mercy and snorted with disdain. She winked at Zhang Yuan, who slowly stepped forward and raised her hands to lift Lu Xi above her head. "Modify the situation. This is impossible." Lu Xi had a look of disbelief in his eyes. He subconsciously wanted to commit suicide but was restrained by Yihu's mental power and could only watch as his inner strength was sucked dry. "The imperial edict has arrived. Lu Xi hasn't come out to receive it yet." A sharp cry came from outside the courtyard. Lu Xi immediately recognized that it was Cao Zhenchun's voice. He had never thought for a moment that he liked this sound at this time. Yihu ignored Lu Xi who was beaming with joy and directly let the other party take him with him. People went to receive the order. Looking at the two people behind Lu Xi, Cao Zhenchun didn't take it to heart. He had already found out about the other party's private support of his subordinates. Lu Xi quickly stepped forward and shouted loudly, "Eunuch Cao, save me!" Yihu winked at Zhang Yufeng, who jumped up and struck Lu Xi hard in the back with his right palm. Cao Zhenchun turned cold and shouted, "Arrogant! How dare you commit murder in front of our family?" After saying that, he used the Tiangang Boy Kung Fu and struck Zhang Yuan with a palm. An invisible wave of air pushed Lu Xi backwards 5 meters away and hit the ground hard, spitting out a mouthful of blood. Cao Zhenchun was shocked and took 3 steps back, his face changed. It was so ugly that Yihu couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Eunuch Cao's retreat has set the martial arts drama back 20 years. Although Cao Zhenchun didn't understand what the man meant, he knew from his expression that he didn't mean anything nice. He snorted coldly and cursed, "Ignorant boy! How dare you commit murder in my yeast factory? Are you bullying my yeast factory because there is no one there? Where is Tai Ying? Tai Ying, who was watching the show in the back, subconsciously answered when Cao Zhengchun called his name. Then he saw a black shadow passing by him, and an extremely strong internal force pushed him to fly towards the woman. Tai Ying felt in his heart she secretly scolded Cao Zhengchun for being despicable and shameless, but Zhang Yuan controlled her and sucked her inner strength away before she could even ask for mercy. Yihu looked at the decisive and decisive Zhang Yuan and nodded with satisfaction. This look was what he remembered as Zhang Huang. Cao Zhengchun ran wildly outside the yeast factory. 3 minutes later, he stopped in the woods and took a breath. When he looked up, he saw 2 people standing in front of him. Cold sweat instantly wet his back. Knowing that he could not escape, Cao Zhengchun suppressed the panic in his heart and used his hands to perform the Tiangang Boigong with a cold voice. Scolded. Crazy man, I will make you pay the price even if I die today. After saying that, she rushed towards Yihu. Zhang Yuan stepped forward to stop him, and then revealed a flaw to let the opponent bypass her and come to Yihu. She wanted to use Cao Zhengchun to test Yihu's strength. She didn't want to be treated like a dog, even if this was the case. It's not okay for people to be kind to her. Yihu looked at the figure flying towards him and shook his head. He wrapped Cao Zhengchun with his mental power, crushed the opponent's protective chi, and held it high in the air. Then he used his mental power to crush Zhang Yuan's protective chi with a cold voice. He said, I will give you 3 chances to take action. After 3 times, life or death will be your fate. Yuan is so scared that she still asks the young master to atone for her sins. Yihu looked at the pitiful appearance of the other party and rolled his eyes and thought to himself, why did he go there so long ago? When he rescued you, he called himself a hero, but now he begged for mercy and changed his name to young master. However, there is a saying that one can hear this call from Zhang Yuan's mouth. The tiger is still a little happy. It would be better to put on the dragon robe and then call it, which will make it more immersive. Yihu let go of Cao Zhengchun and turned to walk towards the residence, ignoring the sound of fighting behind him. Cao Zhengchun, who was already half disabled, could not defeat Zhang Yuan. Half an hour later, Zhang Yuan slowly caught up with Yihu and followed him respectfully like a maid. I just learned from Cao Zhengchun that Yihu is at least a grandmaster. Zhang Yuan now has the strength she dreamed of and doesn't want to be controlled by others anymore. She had no choice before, but now she wants to be the emperor and control everyone in the world. Then he made Hua Wuqi kneel on the ground and cry bitterly, begging him to accept him into the harem. Thinking of the happy place, a smile appeared on Zhang Yuan's lips, and she felt that it was very refreshing to have the power of the world and be drunk in the lap of a beautiful man. End of the chapter. Like and subscribe for more videos like this.